a minute early. Let me take my hair down. I look like a little troll. Also, this tattoo is not real. It's fake. Because I know people are going to ask. My hair has, like, one giant knot at the back of it right now, so that's, like, literally perfect. Hanging here waiting for the Twitch because I'm eager. The Twitch is live. TikTok got here first tonight. I usually, just whoever I'm feeling. It actually depends if I'm early or late. What is up? What is up? What is up? I'm so glad to be back to slides. Like, I did like our little Google Doc moment, and it is good to know that even if I don't have time, we can still have fun. But I was happy to make slides for you all. You can see there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. This is going to be very similar to our Civil War ones, where it's like some long slides, some short slides. Love the slides. We love, we love, we love. How's everyone live laughing and loving on this fine day? Let me put that down. A twinge. That's a much better angle. I don't know why I never did that before. Here, let me get rid of some of this stuff so that I can actually see what the fuck you all are saying. Hello, Mr. Acton and classmates. Excited for history classes again. And I'm very excited for next week. Next week is Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin, y'all. Sarah Palin. I have so much to say about Sarah Palin, but because people have been asking about Reconstruction, and I know it is something we all really wanted, and I had most of the slides already ready to go, I decided to do this one first. Live laughing and loving so hard right now. Sarah Palin, I know. I freaking know. So, how's everyone doing? I'm like firmly in summer mode, weirdly getting depressed. That's awesome. I love life so much, and it is not annoying at all that my body is incapable of adjusting to change. That's awesome. I don't know, I just feel like I have nothing to do every day, but I actually do have stuff to do, but just like, I think it's not leaving the house. Like, I think having to go get a sweet treat is like good. Like, I think I need to leave the house every day. Because literally today I worked like the whole day. I got like so much done today. But I just feel like I didn't do anything because I didn't leave the house. I just took my physics final and getting to join live for the first time. Oh my god, yay! Summer school happening. Hi, I'm crocheting the same sweater I've been making for 6 months. I have a cheesecake and I'm ready to hate America. Oh, you're gonna hate America. Can tell you that much. Last day on Friday and I've been sick since then. That's the worst. That is the freaking worst. This is good. This is very good. It kind of tastes like Sonic. I was gonna go to Sonic, but I didn't really feel like it. So I just made this myself. Woohoo! Okay, let's just get into it. If you missed the Civil War series, it is on YouTube. If you did not watch that, okay. If you did not watch the Civil War stuff, why did the Civil War start and what happened during the Civil War, today will still make sense. Like, you'll still have a fun time today, for those of you that are here with me. So don't even worry about it. I'll, like, catch you up to speed. But for those of you watching this on YouTube, I would recommend watching those first if you haven't, just because, like, I like to learn things as a storyline, so I would just watch them, like, in order. I'm the opposite. I'll get nothing done, but feel so accomplished just from sitting in a park for 2 hours watching TikTok. Maybe I should do that. There's a park near my house. I'm just going to go walk there and watch TikToks on my phone and walk around. That's a great idea. Because I like being outside, but, okay, so I'm doing the Insanity workout program right now. Kicking my ass. So I was like, I want to go outside, but I don't want to, like, exercise because I just got my ass kicked from exercise. So, LMAO, no spoilers. It was hundreds of years ago, but so true, no spoilers. I've been using a walking pad and watching TikTok. It goes by super quick. Yeah, so that's part of why I love the Peloton, because I put the TV on and time just like flies by. But I've been getting like lazy with the Peloton, and I don't mean lazy like I'm not doing it, but I was just like not pushing myself anymore, and I kind of got in like a rut. So that's why I'm doing the Insanity program, and that's the thing that's hard for me about Insanity, aside from the fact that it's literally hard as fuck while you're doing it, is that it's like very fast paced and you have to like remember what to do, so I can't watch anything, and so the time just goes by so slow to me. Is your stream schedule going to change at all over the summer, or is it still weekly? Yes, it is still going to be weekly, but one thing I am doing, because last year when school was starting, I was like dying. Like, the beginning of school is just terrible. So I was reusing old slides, but I don't want to do that again because I don't really like that. And I don't love doing the Google Doc. I really do prefer this. I'm going to try and like make a bunch of the slides this summer so that during the year I can just like pull one that I made a couple months ago. But we'll see if that happens. I've barely done anything, so that's amazing. But anyway, I've been going to the library every day, so I'm forced to work on stuff. Works pretty good. I do have a library card. I don't know where it is, but I feel like they would just let me in without it. I feel like I can just show my teacher ID and they'll let me in. I don't think the library has it like locked down like that, and I'm sure they'll just give me a new card. That's also a good idea. Ames, not Amy, thank you for subscribing. But let's go ahead and talk about Reconstruction because we have a lot to talk about clearly. So this is just a TLDR for anyone that did not see the Civil War video, or if you just forgot, both, whatever. This is literally straight from Britannica.com. So the secession means like to leave, not like succeed, yay, you did it. It's not that. It's not that. The amount of essays I've written that was like, the South did it. They were so no, baby, no. Love you so much, but no. You're allowed to be at the library without a card, period. They said it's open bar. So the secession of the southern states, basically South Carolina was like, deuces, we're fucking out. And that is what caused the Civil War. So let's talk about why they seceded. It was really over slavery, but it was like a lot that went into that economically and politically being over slavery. That's why I hate when people are like, oh, the Civil War was over states' rights. The states' right to do what? The states' right. It was about federal versus state power over slavery. And that went on for like decades and decades before. So between 1815 and 1861, the economy of the North was like very factory based, and the economy of the South was reliant on slave labor. I like how they're calling it free labor on Britannica.com. So in the North, they had like an industrial economy, so they weren't relying on slave labor, but they were buying cotton from the South. So they kind of were relying on slave labor. I go into this in great detail in the other video. I'm like having to rein it in right now. And Northerners had much better transportation. They had bigger financial and insurance and banking institutions and all those things. They had better technology. The North just like had a much better economy than the South. It's never a good thing if your economy is reliant on one thing. Like having a diverse economy is very, very good. Like if your whole economy is relying on like wheat or corn, like let's keep it away from like something heavy. Like if your whole thing is relying on corn and 1 year the harvest is bad, like you're literally fucked. But if you have like a corn farm and a button factory and a paper store, like if you have lots of things, then when something goes wrong, it's like not as detrimental. So that's why it's like not good, in addition to slavery is bad, obviously. But the South having that style of economy was just like very bad for human rights reasons and for like economic health reasons. So 84% of capital invested in manufacturing was invested up north, and the price of cotton had skyrocketed and the value of enslaved people had skyrocketed. So slavery was super, super important in the South, and the South wanted to extend that out west, because this is also when we were like growing west. Like around this time is when we fought the Mexican-American War. We started expanding further out west. The California Gold Rush happened. Like all these people are going out west, and the southern plantation owners are like, oh, we want to go out west and we're going to bring our slaves and then we're going to just like do this whole shindig out west. And the people up north was like, fuck you, brother, I want to go out west. And it's a lot of northerners were against slavery. A lot of northerners were abolitionist. But the primary motivation was not that they were like just passionate about human rights. It was because the poor people up north were like, if there's slaves there, they're going to use the slaves and then I'm not going to get a job. So it was like very economic differences. So when people say it was fought over economic differences, that's what they're referring to, is paid labor versus enslaved person labor. I have such a Bravo brain rot, I can't even register west as a direction. Here, I'll show you. America westward expansion. There we go. So this is like us growing west. Like west, like if you're on the East Coast, west would be like California, Oregon. So you see, like they're not divided into states at this point, and you can see the difference, like slave states, free states. I go into all that and a lot more in the other video, like I mentioned, but just so you kind of know the general area that we're talking about. I have Bravo brain rot too, Vanderpump Nickel. I was actually saying to my boyfriend the other day, I was like, if Vanderpump Rules gets canceled, that's like not the worst thing for me. Like I think I would be sad, but I think like maybe we need to take a break. Like maybe they know what's best. Like it's taken over so much of my brain. I look crazy right now. It's taken over so much of my brain that I feel it's not healthy. So anyway, the extension of slavery into new territories had been an issue since the 1700s, and it really just kind of came to a head in the mid 1800s because we acquired a lot of land in the Mexican-American War, and Abraham Lincoln got elected. The Southerners fucking hated Abraham Lincoln. And the Southerners, they fucking dumbasses on winning elections. They ran multiple people on their ticket, so Abraham Lincoln won, even though he only got 40% of the vote. But like when you run multiple people, that's what's gonna happen. So Abraham Lincoln won. Tea on Abraham Lincoln, he literally didn't even say shit about slavery. Like, the Southerners were like, he won, we're seceding. But Lincoln literally never said anything. So, no one, like, Lincoln was not trying to ban slavery. I know Lincoln ended up banning slavery later, but it's not like he was running for president and was like, to freedom. Like, Lincoln was running for president, and his stance was to prevent slavery from extending, but he said he was not going to challenge it in the South. So the South just like really was still uncomfortable with that and decided to secede. And then that's how the Civil War started. And then they fought the war. And yeah. So Lincoln took office. Confederate forces threatened a fort in South Carolina. Shots were fired, Civil War starts. This is like more detailed than what I was going to read. So basically, the North was losing the war, which is shocking because the North had more people, more money, more guns, more railroads. The North had more everything. But the Southerners, like, they knew how to use a gun, because if you've been working at a factory your whole life, you don't know how to use a gun. But if you grew up farming, like, you probably have hunted before, so you know what the fuck you're doing. So that's why the North was like winning for a really long time. And it wasn't until the South started running out of money that's when they the North was losing for a long time. I apologize. The North was losing because none of their soldiers knew how to fight. And then when the South started running out of money, that's when the South started losing. But for a while there, it was not looking good for the North. It's like, it was really bad for like 2 years. And then Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation freed all of the enslaved people in rebellious states. But the interesting thing is, like, obviously the slave owners, like in Alabama, don't give a fuck what Lincoln has to say. But as the Northern troops were going through the South, they were like, hey, our president says you're free, you should come with us. And they used it to like recruit people. So that was like, obviously it was good to end slavery, but that was done more as like a military strategy than really like a human rights moment. And he also didn't even apply it to every state. Like, a couple states had slaves, but they never seceded. So he didn't even apply it to them. So just like, the Civil War is over slavery, but it's also, no one was fighting that hard to end slavery. It was more about keeping the country together. I want that to make that very, very clear. It also convinced the British and the French not to help out the Confederacy. That's true, because Britain and France had banned slavery like a long time before America did. So they were like, ew, you guys are fighting over slavery? That's embarrassing. We're not getting involved in this. And then they like stopped helping. And then eventually the North won the war, the South lost. Womp, womp, womp. The South surrendered. And when people say the Southern flag, I don't want to see anything but a white flag. All right? Because that's the famous one y'all flew. So let's speak on that. So, a clarification before we get into like the deep Reconstruction. That's just kind of like a TLDR Civil War. I'm going to go through a lot of the suffering of the South, and I'm doing this not because I feel like the war was unjust. Like I said, the South started this war. So all this destruction, they kind of had it coming to them. But it's really important to remember that war is always the worst for like poor people that didn't start it. You know what I'm saying? Well, I guess Lincoln got shot too. the Civil War was bad for everyone, but a lot of the people that are like suffering and so down bad in the South, they did not start this war. They were not part of the aristocrats that owned these huge plantations. And I'm not saying it because it's like, oh, we should feel bad for them. Like, they were fighting to keep slavery. I don't feel bad for them. But I want us to understand how down bad the South was. Because I think the like biggest reason why racial injustice persists so intensely is because we never finished this time period. And I think if we had rebuilt the South in a way that was like very comprehensive and with equality at the forefront, we would be living in a very different world today. So I'm talking about all these bad things that happen to Southerners, not because I feel bad for white Southerners, but because I feel like the lack of resolution and the poor conditions in the South paved the way for institutional racism to continue to thrive in the South. Does that make sense? I'm hoping you're with me, because I don't want you to think I'm like, oh, the poor Southerners, they're victims. They're not victims, but I just think like it shows that we did a really fucked up job fixing this. To me, it's kind of in the same vibe of like, I don't know if y'all know this, but right after World War I, Germany was left in a lot of debt and they were like really a mess. And because the economy was so bad, Hitler took advantage of that to come to power. And like it would have, dictators come to power in bad conditions. So I feel like it's the same thing. Like bad things happen when we leave people in bad conditions. And that's kind of like the way I'm viewing this. So like I said, I think if the South had built a strong economy after the Civil War and not one that was based in exploitation, we would live in a very, very different world. The South as an institution was bad and doesn't need pity. The people do. That's a good perspective on it. And the South also has a hugely high number of people of color. Like that's one thing I really hate about Northern people, like today, right now, like New Yorkers and like people from like, I don't know, like San Francisco and just like elitist ass places where they're like, oh, the South is all these redneck Republicans. And I'm like, the South is like a lot of fucking black people. Like there's a lot of black people in the South that are not the stereotype you're thinking of. And the South is the way it is because of like gerrymandering and institutional racism. So like maybe shut the fuck up and check yourself. like, and like, okay, New York, you want to talk about it, New York? Let's look at how all your skyscrapers and your insane shipping economy was built because you were buying the cotton from the South. Like, New York's hands are not free of blood, so don't throw stones when you're in a glass house. So anyway, Reconstruction. I am going to talk about the government stuff first. Like, we're going to talk about policies and presidents and all that. And then we'll talk about like the social, economic, what's happening to the actual people there. So I'm not going to like glaze over that. Just know it's coming. It's coming. Yes, I moved from Maryland to Mississippi and I can't stand when people write off the South. You're writing off so many people of color. Yeah, it's like the South is actually very diverse. It's very segregated, but when you look at it as a whole, it's very diverse. So the Civil War was fought with devastating cost. More than 3 million men fought in the war, and some ladies, a couple of them. 500,000 died. That was 2% of the population. So imagine if 1 in 50 men died. That means pretty much everyone knows someone who died, because you know 50 men. Not well. Well, I don't know if this crowd knows 50 men, if we're being honest. But you know 50 people. So if 1 out of 50 people is dead, that's someone you knew. Maybe a cousin, maybe someone in your church, maybe someone from your town. So like this really, it would be roughly 2 million people today. So like this was really felt in communities. I don't know 50 men. I mean like collectively over your life. Like coworkers, classmates, like neighbors you don't really know. I'm not talking like no, I mean like acquaintances, like everyone you've met. Can I pick the 1 in 50? This crowd, listen, I didn't mean to like read y'all that hard, but consider yourselves read. So during Sherman's march from Atlanta to the sea, a lot of fucked up shit happened on that march. The Union Army burned everything in its path, so entire cities lay in ruins. So if you burn down the post office, the factories, and you rip up all the railroads, those people aren't going to have jobs after that. Like, did that need to be done to win? Probably. And, like, they did start it. But I feel like we should have gone back and been like, okay, we need to, like, get this together and figure it out. So 2/3 of Southern railroads had been destroyed. Keep in mind, cars don't exist. Like, cars are not a thing during this time. So that means they have no way to transport things other than a literal horse or walking. Like, this is how you're getting from point A to point B. So that means shipping food around? No. Moving people? No. Selling something and sending it to? No. Ordering supplies for your farm? No. Nope. And the South did not have that many railroads to begin with. And 1/3 of its livestock had been destroyed or disappeared because a lot of people had their wealth in livestock as well. So that was another strategy of the Union Army, was to tear down fences and just like let the livestock be free, because that was like robbing people basically. And a lot of Southerners, rich Southerners, were giving money to the military. So they were like, we have to start robbing these bitches, which, like, it worked once, I'm just saying. So the Civil War ruined me. The aftermath of the Civil War in the South, 1867. This is a primary source. I'm really bad at reading cursive like that, so let me pull it up on its actual website. So in 1867, a preacher from Alabama wrote to his brother-in-law. His bitterness is plain in the conclusion. Hundreds of men who were in good circumstances before the war are completely ruined. I believe they intend to give us a territorial government and place the, I'm not going to say that, over us point of privilege. That was never happening. They're going to place our former slaves in charge. No, they're not. The U.S. government, be serious. The white Southerners' anger helped create the Jim Crow era, which we will talk about. I'm not going to read all of it, but you can kind of skim through the details of it. He basically says, once they took the slaves, I was left with land and nothing else. My children are left with nothing but a piece of land, 320 acres. Who would like 320 acres? Me! Like, I don't have anything to give my children. Just 320 acres of land. That's nothing. Like, he's just mad he can't give them cash. He can't give them that cold, hard money. Let me turn my computer on Do Not Disturb. I'll take that. Can I get an acre? No, literally, like, I'm gonna take one. Yeah, that's my text. I'm so popular. No, it's my friend helping me pick outfits. So yeah, the Southerners' anger is palpable. Basically, he used to be worth $45,000. He had a lot of slaves, and now everything's gone. So, womp womp. Sucks. Sucks to be you. Maybe you shouldn't have enslaved people. I bet your worst day was still better than the people you enslaved's average day. I'm going to bet a lot. I'm going to hold your hand, and I'm going to bet you're $45,000. That if we looked at both those days on a loop, your worst day of the Civil War, did anyone beat the shit out of you? Probably not. So, I don't feel like I really am having too much empathy for you in this moment right now. What I am wondering is that the people you enslaved, what's going on with them? Where'd they go? Are they okay? Are they up north? You said they went with the military, so I don't know. His worst day isn't his slaves, isn't their best day. Yeah, I was trying to figure out like how to say that grammatically. I feel like I could farm on 2 acres. Yeah, he was a slave owner. Yup. Here are some pictures of the South after the Civil War. Again, I'm mainly just showing you these, not because I feel bad for them, but just because, like, you can see lots of gravestones. This is not in condition to set up like an equal thriving economy, you know? Trigger warning, dead bodies, but they're super blurry, and this is literally about a war, so I feel like you guys probably expected that. So this was very, very common. This was a paper mill. You could see they destroyed the rail lines going into it. Here's some children. Another big point, lots of orphans. Lots and lots of orphans after the Civil War. You can see just entire towns, entire cities just absolutely destroyed. Here's another one. They would also destroy anything of value. So we talked about this some in the Civil War one. Trigger warning at the exact moment the dead bodies are shown. I forgot I put them in here. I made this a couple days ago. What was I going to say? Oh, so back then, people had large, like, food stock, again, because it was hard to get things shipped in the South. People had large food stock, so they would have, like, tons of grain, like, put away. So Sherman and a lot of the other Union troops destroyed and ate most of the stuff as well. Again, don't feel bad for these people, but that's why a lot of people were starving during Reconstruction as well, because they had their food stocks taken. Here's another area that's absolutely destroyed. I should have written, like, the cities that these were in. Like, this would be a very common scene, because you got to keep in mind the war happened in the South. Like, the fighting is happening in the South. So very, very big long-term impact on infrastructure there. I'll go through some of the rest of these, but they're all pretty much the same thing. Buildings destroyed. Things look terrible. Oh, that one's not as bad. Okay. Maybe we're getting somewhere there. Oh. Weirdly reminiscent of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. What do these pictures remind me of? So, what is the deal in the South? I feel like this is where a lot of the South will rise again shit comes from, is people that were, like, truly traumatized by the war. And yes, for those of you on TikTok, you have to come to Twitch. That's where the pictures are. Link is on my page. I'm a Walmart parking lot everywhere. So, most sieges during the Civil War included long-term regular bombardment and blockading, and they were often initiated after battles failed to force the capitulation of soldiers who defended urban centers. So what that means is they were attacking civilians in cities, is what that means. So beginning in 1863, the Union Army increasingly used siege tactics against southern cities. Soldiers established positions around their targets and cut off communication and supply lines, and they started throwing shells into protective fortification, often city streets, multiple times a day. So the siege of Vicksburg and Atlanta were the most successful meaning it accomplished a military objective. I think when a lot of people die, that's never ideal. Those were the most successful assaults on Confederate cities. The Vicksburg one controlled the Mississippi River, and then Atlanta we talked about a lot when we talked about the Civil War. This put a great amount of stress on soldiers and civilians. These were defended by supply lines, and they resisted until the last months of the war, but then the Union soldiers really just started coming in and fucking shit up. So pantries have been invaded, and a lot of people were hiding in basements and things like that, and they would, like, find them. Cities under siege, people lived in a constant state of anxiety, never knowing when and where bombs would fall. Over the more than 22,000 shells that rained down on Vicksburg over the course of 2 months, residents were forced to take refuge in churches, cellars, or caves, and they would pay people to dig caves into the hill so that they could go into the hill. And, like, yes, that is traumatizing, but you still had the money to pay someone to do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, the person that's doing the digging, I assume they dig one for themselves. Some families literally, like, decorated and brought furniture into the caves because they were there for, like, months sometimes. So Carrie Berry and her family experienced this when she was living in Atlanta when Sherman troops arrived. She said, "We can hear the cannons and muskets very plain, but it's the shells we dread. One has busted under the dining room, which frightened us very much. Almost every day the shells are whistling into the cities," and then ran in panic to their cellar, but they did not feel safe. The shells fell so thick and fast. So yeah, basically a lot of people in the South had really bad PTSD, which, like, PTSD doesn't excuse racism, but I think it is relevant to talking about the Reconstruction after the war. So some stats about this: 11 cities were destroyed and suffered massive damages. These cities were home to over 100,000 people, or 14% of the entire population of the South. And statistics further added that the number of individuals... Oh, I don't know, it's boring. I don't want to read through that. It's more numbers stuff. 2/5 of the livestock was dead. The farms of the South were destroyed, which cost $81 million, and the limited availability of riverboat services and railroads also hindered distribution to market. So even if you were one of the families whose farms did not get destroyed, and a lot of family farms did not have slaves. It's, again, not because they were like, that's wrong. I'm sure a couple of people were. But if you were poor, you didn't own slaves. So, like, a lot of families who were not engaging in slavery had their farms destroyed and, like, were suffering really, really badly. So, numbers show that the direct cost of the war on the Confederacy was a $3.3 billion. And then on top of that, the Confederate dollar was of no value. So it's just like really fucked up. The South is in really fucked up conditions. And again, like, they did start it, but to me, the whole point of Reconstruction is like, okay, and where do we go from here? Like, this is where we are. Where do we go from here? And where we are is really, really, really not good. So like I said, the South was in dire straits, and the process of Reconstruction had a couple different questions that we kind of had to deal with. So one, we had to figure out, what is the political and legal status of the Confederates? Because those people committed treason. They fought a war against the United States of America. So do we like downgrade them? Do they still get to be a state? Do they still get to have people in Congress? Like, what the fuck do we do about that? So one is a big like constitutional crisis. This is kind of like same thing with January 6th vibes. Like in court, they just like don't even know how the fuck to handle this. This is a situation, it was like, we've never had a civil war, so how the fuck do we handle that? There's 4 million formerly enslaved people. Where are these people going? Are they getting jobs? Are they going to live there? Are like, what's happening with that? And then how do we rebuild the South? Like we just looked at, the South is a total fucking mess. So we're first going to look at question number 1, and then we're going to kind of move into question number 2 later. Question number 3 was low-key never addressed, so I really don't have that much to say on it. So the initial focus was readmitting the South to the Union. I feel like the initial focus should have been the human rights conversation of all these people that had just been freed from slavery. What's going on with that? Because keep in mind, most of those people don't know how to read. Most of those people have lived in one location for their entire life as like a person being literally tortured and abused. Like, those people have PTSD. Those people need access to education. Those people probably need access to healthcare and like things like that. It's like, you can't just have someone walk off a plantation and be like, go build a life. Like, they need like help. Like, they don't have anything. Like, they literally have the clothes on their back and nothing else. So instead of our government focusing on that, they were like, okay, let's readmit the South to the Union. That seems like it should be priority number 1. They didn't know how to handle it, so they just pretended they didn't exist. And they pretty much said, like, that's the South's problem, not our problem. So let's talk about Lincoln and presidential Reconstruction. So some of this is during the war, because when the war started to turn and the North was winning, President Lincoln was like, all right, what are we going to do when we win? Because he was thinking ahead. So on December 8th, 1863, he issued a proclamation that is called the 10% Plan. The 10% Plan has a couple different things in it. It's not enough, but it has a couple things in it. So this plan stated that all Southerners could reinstate themselves as U.S. citizens by taking a simple loyalty oath. And once 10% of people who voted in 1860, so keep in mind that's 10% of like primarily land-owning white men, once 10% of voters from 1860 had taken the oath, then they could reestablish a state government. They had to be Republican. Back then, Republicans were anti-slavery. I can't even get into all the changes. Just trust me on that. They had to be Republican. They had to recognize the permanent freedom of slaves, and they had to provide an education for the formerly enslaved people. So this was Lincoln's plan, was the 10% plan. I do really like the last 2 bullets, but I feel like 10% is just a really low number. That's only 1 in 10. Yee. Megan Aflame, thank you for subscribing. Hot take, 50 states is too many states. Oh, God. Try 80%, right? Like, we couldn't even get, like, 51. You couldn't even just do a 51%. So Congress did not like this because, keep in mind, the South had seceded. So this is during the war. Everyone in Congress is a Northerner, and a lot of Northerners were abolitionists. The North was against slavery. They were not against it as hard as they could have been, but a lot of Northerners by this time were against slavery. Because also by this time, some people who had been enslaved in the South had moved north and were like, shit is fucked up. So like people were getting educated more about it, so they started to be more against it. So Congress did not like the 10% plan. They felt like it was way too moderate, and they felt like it was way too easy on the South. Even before the Civil War ended, Tennessee, Louisiana, and Arkansas had reestablished loyal governments meeting Lincoln's criteria. I guess Tennessee, Louisiana, and Arkansas were like, all right, we know we're going to lose this thing, so let's just go ahead and get with the program. But the radical Republicans in Congress refused to admit representatives from these states into Congress, because if you watch the pre-Civil War video, Congress had been crazy. People were literally like beating the shit out of each other in Congress. So that's why the Northern Cardinals were like, I don't care that you are loyal to Lincoln, get out. So they passed the Wade-Davis Bill in 1864. The Wade-Davis Bill required a majority of Southerners to take the loyalty oath. So like I was saying, it would require 51%. And Confederate officials were banned from voting. So they said Confederate officials, so that means people a part of the Confederate government, military leaders, anybody like that, and anyone who had voluntarily borne arms against the United States. So the people that got drafted into the Civil War, they're cool, they can still vote, but anyone that signed up, or like the rich people that were giving money to the military, they are going to be banned from voting. That is what Congress wanted to do. Yes, Congress has always been a circus. 1 in 10 voters back then not everyone could vote, so that's less than 10% of the actual population. Yeah, exactly. Like I was saying, it's only white men who can vote, and mostly white literate men who can vote back then. So 10% is like really not very much. This is significantly harsher, and it was pocket vetoed by Lincoln. A pocket veto is when they just kind of ignore it and they don't sign it. So even though the Wade-Davis bill got passed, Lincoln was like, shh. That didn't happen. And not Congress and the president fighting before the war is even over. Like, learning about this time period does weirdly make me feel better about, like, the political climate of today, because our government has always been a shit show. That kind of actually makes me feel worse, now that I think about it. It's like, we've never had it together, ever. That was just an illusion I had for a brief time. But yeah, so Congress is fighting, the president disagrees with Congress. This shit is a mess. So we will never know what Reconstruction would have looked like under Lincoln, because he got shot. So all those plans were really just kind of null and void because Lincoln got shot. On April 5th, 1865, he went to the captured city of Richmond, Virginia, because the North had taken over Richmond. So Lincoln was like, let me just pull up to Richmond, Virginia. And then a few days later, the South surrendered. So like Lincoln is having the time of his life right now, because Lincoln had like a tough, I was about to say pregnancy. Lincoln had a tough presidency, because the day you get elected, the South secedes. That can't feel good. Like that's kind of like, damn, okay. And then you're at war. You spend the whole time being president at war. You never get to relax even for a moment, because you're literally at civil war. And then right after the war ends, you get shot. That sucks. I feel like, for my Vanderpump Rules fans, that would be like if Sheena got on Dancing with the Stars and got eliminated first round. Like, you've been working your whole life towards this, and then it's just over so fast, so you don't even get to enjoy it. That puts so much in perspective, because all this for someone who didn't even say they were against slavery when they got elected. Exactly. He birthed the country. Pregnancy, presidency, the dichotomy of it all. No wonder they say he wants the White House. I'm mad. He wants to have his fun time as the presidency. Wait, sorry, I missed the very beginning. How did the South start the war again? Gettysburg? Fort Sumter. But they really started it many decades ago. So on the evening of April 14th, he was watching a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford Theater. I have no idea what Our American Cousin is at all. And actor John Wilkes Booth slipped into the president's box, we didn't have Secret Service back then, and fired a single shot into the back of Lincoln's head with a small pistol. And he timed it to when the audience was laughing to like mask the sound of the gunshot. But it's a gunshot. Everyone still heard it, dude. And as supporters of slavery, Booth and his co-conspirators believed that Lincoln was determined to overthrow the Constitution and destroy the South. He just has like a bad aura to him. Like the hairline is already receding, and I'm pretty sure he's in his 30s. And then early the next morning, Lincoln died. He didn't die immediately. Common misconception. How rude. Literally so rude. So this is actors. We didn't have video cameras back then. But this is Booth killing Lincoln.
The Lincolns and their guests arrive at Ford's in high spirits.
The crowd applauds the president. They stop the play.
Live footage. This is why I could never be president, because walking into a room and having everyone turn and start clapping is so fucking awkward. I'd be like, can you sit down? Like, I'm here to watch the play. I'm not even in the fucking play. Yes, I post all of these on YouTube. Like, I would feel so weird. And, like, being the president, everyone, like, salutes when you walk in. I'd be like, relax. You're weirding me out. Don't do that.
They sit down, and the play begins.
Yeah, comes to their barking up the wrong tree about the oak.
No, I don't want to be perceived.
About 10 minutes after 10, Booth began to mount the stairs, leading up to the second tier of boxes, where you would find President Lincoln.
10:12 p.m.
As Booth makes his way toward the presidential box, he is seen, but no one stops him.
Because he worked there. He was an actor.
He was well known to everyone, a popular actor, of course.
I've seen this video so many
times. And that
times.
Booth get right behind Lincoln.
Not used to the manners of a good society.
Booth is in position at Ford's.
Booth comes into the box right as the whole theater bursts into laughter.
As the crowd roars with laughter, Booth takes aim.
Stop apologizing, old man.
And so that moment where the whole future looked like had finally lifted, the clouds had separated, comes crashing down.
The bullet enters the back of Lincoln's head.
Booth stepped up to him, fired a shot from perhaps 3-4 inches, not right against Lincoln's head, but close, and it hit Lincoln.
So if they reported this nowadays, I wonder what the headlines would be. I wish Twitter existed when this happened. I would love to see Twitter the day that Lincoln was assassinated. I feel like that would have been a crazy day on Twitter.
In the back of the head.
This is the real
like
gun.
a sledgehammer would.
That's why he has gloves on.
This is the Derringer that Booth used on April 14th.
Isn't that crazy?
It's about 6 inches long, weighs about 8 ounces.
Plays so bad it killed
A
a
part of
president.
the Ford's theater collection, this instrument of history was Booth's personal weapon.
Booth probably
they
had this
robbed
weapon
him.
for at least 5 or 6 years before the assassination took place. It fires a single bullet, so this is like
that's
we
cool.
say,
This was
one
the
and
first
done.
time that pictures were used on wanted posters.
Booth dropped the pistol, went to the front of the box, intending to escape. Major Rathbone jumped from his seat. He grabbed Booth from behind and pulled him back from the railing.
The girls are fighting.
Booth twisted around in the Major's grip, and for the first time the men were face to face. And Rathbone later said he was absolutely horrified by the look on Booth's face. And Booth
He
was
was mad
stronger
Lincoln
than
watched
Rathbone
them.
was, so he was able to free himself and slash Rathbone with a knife.
And then he jumps.
Booth leaps from the box to the stage.
Sic semper tyrannis.
And makes his escape.
Kerchow. So this is his escape. He was like on the run for a little hot minute there, following John Wilkes Booth. So for a couple days, he was just kind of going all around, going all everywhere. Ford's Theater in Washington, you can see people were hiding him. He got far, but not that far. So he assassinates him, and then he goes to a tavern, and then he moves again on Easter, guided by a free black man. That's surprising. and he went to the home of a Confederate sympathizer. So he's basically just going on like a racist tour and hanging out with all of his friends. And then approximately 2 a.m., detectives from the Union and detectives and Union soldiers pull up to a farm and roughed up the farm owner, and that's where they found him. So, womp 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 womp. And he died. In his final hours, he said, "Tell my mother I die for my country," after to ask the soldiers to raise his hands so he could see them. Useless, useless, useless. His body was loaded onto a wagon and taken to a steamship where it would be transported to D.C. for identification and autopsy. Oh yeah, they shot him while they were looking for him. Bro, your country wanted to end you. Womp womp, he's dead. So, Lincoln's dead, Booth is dead. Who's the president now? Andrew Johnson. Terrible fucking news. Andrew Johnson is a Democrat from Tennessee. So we are fucked. Because like we saw, Lincoln barely cared about slavery. Andrew Johnson cares about slavery in the wrong way, I personally think. So Andrew Johnson's the president now. This is the man in charge of the people that just experienced slavery because, perfect. Let's just put a slave owner sympathizer in the presidential office. That's amazing. He was from Maryland, a border state. Thank you. I didn't even know that. So Andrew Johnson, we kind of hate him. He was actually born in North Carolina. He grew up in poverty. He apprenticed to be a tailor as a boy, but then he ran away. And then he opened a tailor shop in Tennessee and married this lady, Eliza. And he participated in debates at the local academy. He became a speaker when he entered politics. He was a member of the House of Representatives in the and in the Senate in the 1840s and 50s, and he advocated for a homestead bill to provide a free farm for every poor man. Okay, maybe he's a socialist. Interesting. Also, I hate when people talk about like, oh my god, the U.S. government is so socialist. Our government used to never give people anything. They gave people 160 acres of free land. They could do that again. I would like that. So anyway, during the secession crisis, he remained in the Senate even when Tennessee seceded. So that made him a hero in the North because he was kind of like, hey guys, I know I'm from Tennessee, but I don't really fuck with that. Like, I don't really fuck with what they're doing right now. So the North was like, oh, you are the least terrible racist. We love you. So in 1864, the Republicans contended that their national Union Party was for all loyal men. So that's why he got nominated for vice president. They were like, he's a perfect example of someone who is racist but did not commit treason. And that is what we are going for. Racism but no treason. It seems like is their vibe at this time. My dad gets mad at my grandpa for yelling about socialism because socialism is the only way my grandpa got out of a poor family. Truly the least worst person to be there. But he didn't put that together. So, presidential Reconstruction under Johnson. Andrew Johnson believed that Reconstruction was for the executive branch, and he wanted rapid restoration of the Confederate States. So he took oath of office when Congress was in recess. Congressional recess right now, I feel like is too long, but back then it was long as hell. So Congress was in recess from April to December. So he was in charge by himself that whole time. So that's why, like, doesn't really seem like anyone has a fire under their ass because it just really seems like we're not really moving with that much urgency. This stream makes me miss college courses, hated the homework, loved the lectures. Why did Lincoln have him as the VP? Because they were trying to be like unity together, and he, even though he was from the South, he stayed loyal to the North. So that's why they were like, oh, we'll pick you because it's like a symbol of unity. They said recess ends after elementary school, liars. So Johnson revealed his Reconstruction plan, but he called it a restoration plan, and he implemented it in the summer of 1865 when Congress was in recess. So it was pretty similar to Lincoln's. It called for Southern states to, 1, withdraw their secession, 2, they had to swear an allegiance to the Union. It did have a higher threshold. I'm not 100% sure it was. I don't think it was a majority. They had to ratify the 13th Amendment. That was important. They had to ratify it. The 13th Amendment is what abolished slavery. That's the only part of this plan that I'm like, okay, good strategy on getting that ratification pushed through. He pardoned 13,000 former Confederates. Because keep in mind, he's from the South. So he's like, that's Bill. I'm going to pardon Bill. Pardon is when the government, like, forgives you. Like, you get a little kiss on the forehead from either the president or the governor, and they're like, well, you didn't do anything wrong. Like, it literally, like, disappears off your record. Like, you're fucking good. And he pardoned a lot of those military leaders, the people in the Confederate governments. So that's important because A, they can vote again, and B, they can run for office again because they're pardoned. So it's like that treason never happened. So if you were the governor of fucking wherever, you can run and you can be governor again, even though you literally seceded and brought arms against the United States government. And I just think that that's bananas. That is crazy. Of course he's going to pardon them. They run on the good old boy network to get reelected. Exactly. I'm pardoning 13,000 of my closest friends. Can y'all chill? To get pardoned by Johnson, you just had to write him a letter. And he would write you one back and be like, you're pardoned. We're good. Don't even worry about it, King. By December 1865, Congress was reconvening. All seceded states had formed new governments under Johnson's plan and were awaiting congressional approval. So Congress came back and the entire South was like, he forgave us, so we're ready to come back. How's you guys this day going? How was your summer? Pardon Daddy Johnson for real. It kind of sounds like one of those mail church scams. So now we move into congressional reconstruction because that was when the president was in charge and now Congress is in charge because they're back in session. They were on vacation for like 10 fucking years and Congress is like absolutely fucking not. So side note about Congress, I kind of already said this, but I think it's crazy that they get so much time off. And I understand why they do, because when the founding fathers created Congress, it was like, oh, you leave your farm, you go do Congress, you come back. It was not supposed to be like a full-time job. But like, our country just had a civil war. Clock in, get to work. Get to work. We have stuff to do. What are you fucking talking about? So this is how I think we should run Congress now. If Trump gets reelected, can he pardon himself? Not for what he was just found guilty of, because he was found guilty by the state of New York. So the governor of New York would have to pardon him. So Johnson was able to pardon because these people committed treason. Treason is a federal crime. So the president can pardon you for federal crimes and the governor can pardon you for state crimes. Good question. So this is how I think we should treat Congress. They should only be allowed to be in Congress like 8 to 12 years max. Like I think after like 12 years, like wrap it up, get a new hobby. And I think they should be on like a 2-week schedule. So like 2 weeks in DC doing Congress, and then you go to your local office for 2 weeks. To be clear, I do want them working 365 days a year. Okay, clock in. Okay, it's an important job. Get to work. But I think it's like, you got to go be with your constituents because you got to know what the fuck's going on. You got to know what people need to bring back to DC. And like, we have airplanes. Like, if Taylor Swift can fly everywhere, so can Congress. Like, get it done. And I feel like if Congress passes a climate change bill, the flying will like even out. You got to think big picture here. So back to Civil War Congress. They need 2 weeks of PTO and that's it. I think we should give them, I'm very pro work-life balance. I think they should get 2 weeks off for Christmas. We'll let you have a full 2 weeks off for Christmas. They should get 2 weeks off in the summer, and then they should get 5 PTO days that are like, they can choose when they take them. But they will have blackout days on like major budget deadlines and stuff. Like, you're not allowed to take PTO whenever you want. I'm going to start treating them like teachers. Like, you have your designated breaks, and then you have a couple PTO days that you're only allowed to use at specific times. Because I will grant, like, I don't want an exhausted, burnt out Congress person. Like, I want them getting enough sleep and like being rational people. Like, it's in my best interest to make sure you are good. They should get average American vacation time. So, Congress reconvened December 4th, 1865. So fucking kind of you to get back to work. And they refused to read the names of any Southern delegates. The girls are fighting. So, radical Republicans were asserting their control over Reconstruction. They were like, we're back in session. Fuck the president. We're in charge here. And for those of you on TikTok, you have to come to Twitch to be able to see all the photos we're looking at. Love you. So February 1866, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This declared specifically that Black Americans were citizens and they could not have their right to property restricted. So this essentially like gave more clarification to the 13th Amendment, saying like these people are citizens, they should be able to buy land. Johnson vetoed the act because he sucks, but then Congress passed over his veto with a 2/3 majority, because if the president vetoes it, you have to get like a higher threshold of Congress people. That was the first major piece of legislation that ever overcame the veto of a president. So Congress did pass that Civil Rights Act, which was like kind of the bare minimum. The passage of this bill effectively announced that the national government had the responsibility of protecting the rights of its citizens, not its states. Even though the Civil War was fought over slavery, the Civil War did give a lot more power to the federal government. The federal government had never been making legislation like this before around like property and people's rights and voting and things like that. Well, voting a little bit. But yeah, the federal government is really showing like a lot more teeth than they ever have. And I like how they passed this civil rights law, but they really didn't enforce it for like over 100 years. So like, so glad that you wrote your little paper and like passed your little law, but like maybe we go to the South, like maybe we make sure that that's getting followed. So massacre in Memphis. We're going to talk about violence, just to let you know. There won't be any graphic photos or anything like that. So less than a month later, there was like a riot basically in Memphis. White mobs, including the entire city police force. It says most. I feel like it was most. It must have been a lot of them. Probably not 51%. You get what I'm saying? I think it's more like 80, 90%. This art is crazy. Yeah, so the white mobs, including the police force, were literally hunting Black people in the South. Like, they were literally terrorizing cities. And this happened in multiple cities. There was the one in Memphis. There was another one in New Orleans. 40 people were killed in New Orleans. And this violence sparked a push to pass the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is the citizenship that says anyone born in the United States is a citizen and has equal protection under the law. Because basically, like, the police were literally hunting people. So they were like, hey, all citizens are supposed to have equal protection under the law. It did literally barely even worked, but I don't even want to say it barely worked because it didn't. I mean, are we surprised? We're going to talk about the history of policing in a second. I should have put it right here. Oh, well. So early Reconstruction amendments, like I already mentioned, 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The way I always teach my class this to make them remember it for the test, 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote. Because I always say, does it make sense to give someone the right to vote if they're enslaved? Is their master going to let them vote? No. You have to go in order. You have to free people first. If you give someone the right to vote, but they're not a citizen, is that going to work? No. Then you have to grant citizenship. Citizenship is the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. Oh, back to 13, sorry. 13th Amendment, this is very interesting. A note of the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, shall exist in the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. That little sentence was put in there very, 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 very intentionally and has caused problems that we still feel to this day. Because this is the exception. We allow slavery as a punishment for a crime. That's important. That's important. Now, like I said, the 14th Amendment, moving on to the 14th Amendment, this guarantees citizenship to anyone regardless of their race born into the United States. This overturned the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott is a really important court case. I talk about it in an older video, but the Dred Scott decision is basically where the Supreme Court said that Black people of the United States were not citizens, so the 14th Amendment reversed that. And this also struck at discriminatory legislation like black codes, which we will talk about. Again, these amendments were passed, but they really did not get enforced like they needed to be. Yes, if you haven't seen 13th, great movie that focuses on that part of the amendment. 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote goes hard. My mind is expanding, right? Free citizens vote. You gotta be free, you gotta be a citizen, and then you can vote. It's like the best way to remember anything, which it makes logical sense. That's why it works. So the 14th Amendment was originally passed after Congress heard from the victims from the Memphis Massacre. And according to the Constitution, they needed 3/4 of the states to ratify it for it to go into effect. Every southern state except Tennessee, because Andrew Johnson's from Tennessee, so I think he was like, don't fucking embarrass me right now, ratify this shit right now. All of them refused to ratify the amendment. They were like, literally, no, we're not doing it. So it made it clear that Congress was going to have to take drastic measures to actually like make change and get this amendment ratified and create any kind of progress. This is just a meme that I thought of. Congress thinking that passing a few little laws would get literal slave owners to change their behavior.
No one's listening! Listen!
Because like, did you think that they were going to be like, oh, you passed a law? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. You passed a law? I didn't hear. So now we move into military reconstruction. The Congress people were like, fuck y'all. We're sending in the military. You are under martial law. Congratulations. They had a couple different military districts. There were 5. You can see them here. Very large districts. Very, very large. So, like we said, in 1866, every former state except Tennessee still remained out of the Union because, like we said, when they came to Congress, Congress was like, we don't fucking care. So they had no say in federal elections. If you can't vote, you don't have an impact on the election. So when we had a congressional election in 1866, almost all of Congress was Republican because it was really just the North, which I already kind of mentioned this. So this gave Congress a ton of fucking power because they are able to overrule any presidential veto. So that's why Johnson is completely like useless at this point, basically. President Johnson after Congress iced him out. Look at him. Womp, womp, womp. That's what you get. So more lore about the 1866 election, and this map is just so funny to me. This country is such a fucking joke. Like, this is our election map. We had a lot going on this year, you guys. So by spring of 1867, radical Republicans were firmly in control of Congress, so they passed the Military Reconstruction Act. Johnson vetoed it, and then they overrode his veto. They were like, I really don't care what you have to say. This separated southern states into 5 military districts. Each district was overseen by a military general. I do fuck with this, that they are going to like force the South to follow the new laws that are being passed, but I don't think one person can oversee like Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. Like that's a lot of people. So Congress laid out very strict new terms. To re-enter the Union, not gonna lie, we should bring that map back. It's really amazing. To re-enter the Union, the rebel states had to adopt new state constitutions because a lot of the state constitutions had things about slavery in them. So they made all of them start over from scratch and write new constitutions. They had to give Black men the right to vote, even though many northern states did not give Black men the right to vote. They had to elect new state governments, and they had to ratify the 14th Amendment, because 15 is voting, and we haven't passed 15 yet, just to give you context. How am I just now learning that there were districts, right? Reconstruction is like there's so much to it, and I wish I could get into more detail. Honestly, I should have done this as 2 parts, because then I could have like read stories of people that experienced it. That would have been like a really good add-on. Maybe I'll do like a part 2 to this later with just stories. So due to the aggressive terms and enforcement of these terms, I personally don't think that that's that aggressive. Like, I really, really, really don't. I really don't think that's that aggressive. Like, I know y'all think that I'm like nice and would be like a good leader. If I was in Congress, I would have been like, anyone that owns slaves has to go to a mandated re-education camp. Okay? They're going to be taken. I'm going to take them. I'm going to go to Kansas, and I will re-educate them out in Kansas. We're going to learn a lot together. Like, that's what I would have done. I think we could have punished them even way harder than we did. I think that, not to sound like a dictator, and like, I don't want to get banned for hate speech, but like, I think that public violence does really have an effect on human behavior. So one might say that if anyone was discriminating or being racist, maybe punishing them in a public way might have sent a message to others that that behavior was not to be tolerated. So I personally think that these terms are very, very light. I think this is good. It's like better than the other plans we've looked at, but it's not that much, if we're being honest. So Southerners called this bayonet rule. This is a famous cartoon about that, where basically carpet bag and bayonet rule, because a carpet bag, let me show you a picture of a carpet bag. It's like kind of a grandma-esque suitcase. No, not shopping. Images. This is a carpet bag. These like old-timey big purses. Most of the soldiers and people from the North had a bag with them, so that's why they called them carpetbaggers. So enforcement. Congress proceeded to add supplementary Reconstruction acts that directed military commanders to start registering people to vote. So in the South, the provisional governments that were established by Johnson were swept away. So like, this is what I mean. Our government has always been a shit show. Like, the president put in a provisional government. Congress took it away. Like, it's always been a shit show. And they started registering African Americans and white Americans who had not supported secession. So, like, the white people that didn't own slaves and were just, like, small-town farmers who didn't give a fuck about the Civil War, all of the people that had been enslaved that are free now, they're registering all of them to vote. This is a famous cartoon. This is from 1867. This always gets put on test. And at the bottom, you can see it says the first vote. This is how people used to vote. You would go in line and drop your little thing into these glass little jars. This is important because one thing you'll notice is this is very public. So everyone can see who you voted for. Today, we have like voter privacy. That's why you like go in a little booth by yourself. But back then, all of these terrible racist white aristocrats were watching this and being like, he's voting for who? Who's he voting for? What's going on here? Which we will get into later. So activists and army officers spread across the South registered freedmen to vote, and martial law was declared in southern states. So basically what that means, the police don't have power, local governments don't have power, the military is in power, and they can do whatever the fuck they want. As a math teacher, history teachers amaze me with how much content y'all teach and how you're able to effectively explain it all. One thing, carpetbagger sounds like something my homophobic grandma would call me. That's funny. Anyway, but one thing about teaching history is a lot of people think that I have all of this memorized. I do not. I have a lot of general information memorized, but like specific laws and dates, I do not have that memorized. I have to be looking at it, and then like when I'm looking at it, it makes me remember other stuff too. Like I can't just like yank everything at a moment's notice. So white Southerners were often labeled scallywags. So if let's say, I mean, I am a white Southerner. So let's say I was alive during this time, and let's say I hired a black person and paid them a wage. I would be called a scallywag. Let's say I was alive during this time and I got a job as a secretary for the military. I would be labeled a scallywag. Basically, any white Southerner who was like not against the North got labeled as a scallywag. And then the Northerners were called carpetbaggers. The way I would always teach my class to remember this, scallywag starts with an S. They're from the South. Carpetbaggers are from the North because they have their bag. So if you can't remember, the one with the bag is from far away. That's like, keep it so clear in your mind. Because I like teaching y'all stuff that I've taught in my class because I have all like my little memorization tricks, even though you guys don't have to memorize this. So I'm like literally tiring myself out from talking so much. My God. So beginning in 1867, fewer than 1% of all black men in the U.S. could vote. By the end of 1867, that number was higher than 80%. That is so impressive. This is the one part of Reconstruction that, like, our government was kind of eating. Like, for Congress to register 80% of black men to vote in 1 year, that's incredible. And the vast majority of them were Republican, because if Republicans were anti-slavery, that would make sense. That's really not hard to put two and two together there. So, June 1868, 6 of the former Confederate states get admitted. They have officially met Congress's requirement, and by July 1868, the 14th Amendment was officially ratified. So now we have equal protection, the 14th Amendment that has been passed. As if this moment in history was not dramatic enough, Johnson was just impeached by the House of Representatives because basically they hated him, so they were like, we're gonna look for any reason to impeach you because we fucking hate you, which is understandable. He kind of sucked a lot. So he basically violated this law called the Tenure of Office Act. He fired someone without asking for congressional approval to fire that person, which like technically was illegal, but I think if he was not hated, no one would have done anything. Us with Trump. I don't know about that. But anyway, so he did get impeached, but he did not get removed from office. So that is literally the exact same thing as Trump. He was the first president in U.S. history to get impeached. Literally, he fired his Secretary of War without asking for approval. That's what he did. So, twinning the person who brought up Trump, both Donald Trump and Andrew Johnson's impeachment were driven by deep partisan conflicts centered on allegations of abuse of presidential power and obstruction of legislative authority, but neither of them were removed from office. So, very similar situations, or actually very different situations, but very similar outcomes for their situations, which I thought was really interesting. So then it is a presidential election. It's 1868, baby. The war has been over for a good 3 years now. We're moving into election season. So, by the election of 1868, all Confederate states except for Virginia, Mississippi, and Texas had met requirements under military Reconstruction, and they re-entered the Union in time to be able to vote in that federal election. What is the point to impeach without removal? There's really no point, but I don't think that's ever anyone's intention. But the House of Representatives, that's who votes on impeachment, and then the Senate votes for removal. So when the House votes to impeach, they always are hoping that Senate will remove, but Senate, they get to make their own choice there. So I don't think it's ever a strategy like we're going to impeach, but we're not going to remove. I think it's just like how it shakes out sometimes. White gangs in the South had started to terrorize black voters in major southern cities. So Republicans in Georgia and Louisiana had started abandoning their campaigning. So even though it kind of seems like things are getting better, kind of things are not getting better. Like this is a political cartoon and it has this guy who was murdered and it says 1 vote less, and that's from Richmond. We're going to talk more about this in a couple seconds when we get to failures of Reconstruction. Even though there was this insane violence, 500,000 very, very brave black men, because they would literally watch, see who you voted for, and then physically attack you the second you walked away from the little voting thing. 500,000 black men cast their vote. In every southern state except Georgia and Louisiana voted for the Republican candidate. Because like I said, there are a lot of people of color in the South, and a lot of them were voting Republican. So that was Ulysses S. Grant. Kind of like the House is charging the president and the Senate is the jury. That is terrifying. So yeah, Ulysses S. Grant, you've probably heard of him. He was a general in the Civil War, and he led the North to victory, and now he's going to be the president. So he's really in his man boss moment. And this is when we passed the 15th Amendment. After the election of 1868, radical Republicans were very strong, and so their determination renewed. So Congress blossomed with suffrage amendments. Suffrage is the right to vote. After considerable bickering, the 15th Amendment was sent to the states for ratification in February 1869, and the 15th Amendment forbids states to deny the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It's really important here that we break this down. Race, color, or previous condition of servitude. We don't see anything in there about education status. We don't see anything in there about wealth status. We don't see anything in there about your family. There's very specific things that they wrote in there. And it is not a comprehensive enough amendment, in my opinion. So, with the remaining unconstructed states had to ratify this amendment before they could even be considered for readmission to the Union, it does seem like this is a really effective political strategy to basically be like, I'm going to hold your admission over your head and force you to ratify this amendment that I want ratified. I do applaud them for that. And because they passed the 15th Amendment, another thing not mentioned in the 15th Amendment is gender. A lot of white women got very, very upset. The 15th Amendment did not say anything about denial on voting based on sex, which made Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony very frustrated. Susan B. Anthony is actually super fucking racist. There's a famous quote from her where it's not famous actually, I just know it, where she said she would rather cut off her right arm than fight for black men to vote, but she didn't use the word black men. She used a not as progressive, well, not progressive, but like not as accurate, more offensive term. I'll let you look it up and see. They felt like men protected their own rights, but not the rights of women. So the 15th Amendment, like I said, did not grant women the right to vote, and this really gave a lot of steam to the white women's suffrage. It was the N-word, but not the really bad one, the one that was like in the documents. Black and Spanish. That's the word that she used. That's what I'll tell you. So anyway, a lot of white women were like, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. We want the right to vote. You're going to let these men vote, but not us. And this is why white women started to fight really hard for the right to vote, because they were jealous. So this and the 14th Amendment, which only protected males, split the women's suffrage movement in two. Some people were like, okay, we should fight for all women to vote. And then some people were like, no, white women should vote. It was like a racism thing. So in 1869, the National Women's Suffrage Organization was formed and admitted only women. This group wanted an amendment. They were against the 15th Amendment because they thought it should include women. The American Women's Suffrage Association wanted to go state by state to secure women's suffrage, and they supported the 15th Amendment, and they accepted both men and women as their members. So there was a lot of division within the women's rights movement as well. So, ratification. Virginia ratified the 15th Amendment in January 1970, Mississippi in February, and Texas in March. So it became ratified, and all states are officially readmitted to the Union in 1870. So that is 5 years after the war ended. All states have officially been readmitted to the Union. But Reconstruction is far, 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 far from over. So, that was a lot. That was all of like the legal stuff and the amendments and the leaders and Congress. Now we're going to get into people and the woes that are plaguing the communities. This is kind of gross, but it's kind of good too. So, the failure of Reconstruction. This is, I think, what more you all came for. So now we're going to go to that question. The 4 million, I don't like that they call it the $4 million question. It's 4 million people. I don't know why they put dollar. So, what's in the cup? Oh, this is Sprite, a lime, and vodka. You know what I hate? Thanks for asking. I hate when you go to a bar and you order a Sprite and vodka and they give you soda water and vodka, because I want Sprite. Not soda water, Sprite. The soda for children. Sprite, please. So, let me take a break for a second. I just feel like my brain was just moving so fast. Wow. I didn't realize we were drinking tonight. I mean, when talking about such a heavy topic, we kind of have to. It's also summer, you know? It's summer. Brain break. Do you guys hear my boyfriend yelling at his video games? I would have brought wine. I wish I could like wine. I want to like wine so bad, but I just don't. It gives me headaches. I love Sprite. Okay. So let's talk about the failures of Reconstruction. Even as the political and legal status of Southern states was being debated, a question loomed very large in the South. What is going to happen with these 4 million people? How are they going to get... I don't like that they say reincorporated, because they were never incorporated into American society. So we had to figure out these people that are now free from a life in bondage, what is going to happen to them? So one original plan was 40 acres and a mule. This happened during the war. General Sherman, we talked about him a lot in our Civil War video. General Sherman issued Special Field Order number 15, and basically It seems like General Sherman is like on the rightest side of history. Like he seems like he was doing the most because like we talked about, General Sherman came through the South and was confiscating land from Southerners. So he was going to give every black family 40 acres of land and a mule because he was like, then they have land, they can start a farm, because most of these people, the like training that they have is in farm labor. So you can't expect them to like go get a job at a factory because A, there's no factories, and B, they've never done that before. So I get where his head is at. Like, oh, if we give them land that they own and a mule to like help them work the land, then like they can kind of get somewhere with that. Like that seems like the most clear-cut, simple way to give everybody something to start with. Is it perfect? No, but like for simplicity's sake, you really can't get much better than that, in my opinion. Sherman is my hear me. No! Maybe. Anyway. So, for context, this is a couple months before the war ended. So, this is the land that he was giving. This is the land that he had confiscated. And side note, this is incredible land. This land, just because I'm like a nerd, this land has a very, very fertile soil. It's also near the coast, so that means you can do international shipping. So, I think if people had been able to keep this land, like the world would look so different today because this land is so fucking valuable. Climbed the pipeline, it's real, we love. So by June, 40,000 freedmen had settled on Sherman land along the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. But this was very short-lived. Keep in mind, we just went backwards. So now we're back in 1865. I told you guys all about the government stuff that happened in the 1860s. Now I'm running it back, and I'm going to tell you what's happening to people during the 1860s. So President Johnson ordered that the land be returned to the plantation owners who originally owned the land. So that was predictable because those are literally his friends, I think. But that super sucks. The mule is so insulting, though, because they can't reproduce. So you're forced to purchase a new work animal if something happens to it. You can't just breed it and make more. That is a good point. I'm not a farm girl, so I really had no idea about that. But that makes a lot of sense. I think you're right. Interesting. Because of course he did. Boo. Boo. So close. So close. Imagine if it wasn't just Sherman and like the whole government. No, Sherman is a northerner. Sherman is a northern general. He was a part of the military of the Union. And he like really was the one that like final coffin in the South won the war. Do we think northern men were smart enough to know you can't just have one mule? I feel like they were just like, we have a lot of mules. Maybe we could pass those out. Like, I think that was just kind of like what they had on hand. Just maybe. We were so fucking close, though. Literally so close. Society of President Johnson never reversed Special Field Order 15, and Black Americans got the highly valuable farmland that they had been working for generations. Oh no, that was on purpose for sure. You think so? They could have given them any farm animal. A genetically sterile hybrid is not the choice. True. Mules were army supplies, basically. Oh, so okay. I think we're both right. Like, I think you're right that they knew that this was not ideal, and they could have made a choice to do it better, but they were like, we just have these mules, so let's just use them instead. Like, I think it was a choice that, like, they knew it could be a better choice, and it's also just what happened at the time. Look at society. It would be so great. John Wilkes Booth got the wrong guy. So they also set up the Freedmen's Bureau to assist in reincorporation of ex-slaves into American society as free men. Congress and Lincoln, before he died, created the Freedmen's Bureau, and General Olive Howard was put in charge. The organization had a couple different purposes. It was to provide food, clothing, education, and job training to formerly enslaved people. By 1870, they had several thousand teachers, white and black teachers, who were teaching in schools for people that had been formerly enslaved. And an important note, I can't remember if I put the picture. Okay, I did. An important note, look at the age diversity in this classroom. Because keep in mind, most adults could not read either. So it was just not kids. There's a better photo I should have put that had like people aged like 5 to 60 in the classroom. I distinctly remember being in U.S. history and everyone just raging for a whole class period about how great things would be if Reconstruction went differently. Our country has absolutely no follow through. No, none at all. So the Bureau spent $5 million to set up schools for the newly freed people. And by the end of 1865, more than 90,000 of those people were enrolled as students. So the schools are segregated, like you can see from this photo. Attendance rates were over 80%, but I want to keep in mind these numbers. 90,000 formerly enslaved people, that's a lot of people, that's great. There were 4 million. 4 million people. So out of those 4 million, only 90,000 are actually enrolled in school. What percentage is that? Does anyone know? How do you find a percentage? I don't know. I'm going to Google it. Percentage calculator. No, not percent change calculator. Oh my God. Percentage calculator. Okay. 90,000 is what percent of 4 million? 2.25%. Yikes. 2.25%. $1 per person they wanted to attend. Yeah, so great. So glad you opened a school. Why are only 2.25% of the people enrolled in the school? Sounds like it's going great for people enrolled, but so by 1870 there were more than 1,000 schools for freedmen. This is a better photo where you can really see the age difference, how there's some older kids, some younger kids, some adults. What was it before? Anyway, 1,000 schools, still not ideal. So they also helped create a lot of HBCUs. This part is really cool. A lot of these very famous HBCUs were created during this time. Fisk, Howard, lots of people like that. It was to teach them to read. It was just a school in general. So reading was the primary objective, but it was a public school. So they did math and history and other kind of stuff as well too. So maps, mapping the Freedmen's Bureau. I was going to put a picture, but I couldn't find a good one, so I just wanted to go to this website. I hate when I let me try and just Googling it. Mapping the Freedmen's Bureau. Let me in! Let me in! Why is my Wi-Fi being so slow? Okay, there we go. We're in. View maps. View map. I don't know why I have to hit view map 10 times. I guess this really isn't that bad compared to what everyone else lived through. I should relax. It's powered by WordPress, so let me relax. We're going. Here we go. So it's a lot. You can see, it's quite a lot. And they're primarily in the South. But even when you start to zoom in, it's a lot, but is it? If you live anywhere in this area, you're pretty far, and it's not like there's a railroad you can take. So in Macon, Georgia, Macon was a big thing. That's where the superintendent of education was. They had field offices, and again, not all these field offices are schools. And then let's look on coastal Georgia. These places are pretty far apart, and let's look at North Carolina. When you are looking at the map as a whole, it looks like a lot, but if you live in rural North or South Carolina, where a lot of these people did, that's not that many options. That's a freedmen's camp, another field office. It's a lot, but it's not enough is really what I want to make very clear. So they did a lot of really amazing work, but they were really set up to fail. So in March 1865, Congress established the Freedmen's Bureau, like we said. They often fell short of the vast undertaking as white mobs and institutions throughout the South continued to oppress, attack, and exploit African Americans during Reconstruction. Local bureau offices served as central community locations to document reports of violence and register people to vote. They would verify labor contracts, provide food, perform marriages, help connect people with family members they had lost. And many of the Bureau's difficulties began when it was established as a division of the War Department and only authorized to operate for 1 year after the war's end. So Congress did not give a budget for the Bureau and instead left the staffing and funding to the military. And the military was just not equipped to handle this in any way, shape, or form. So some lawmakers, also I feel like my Wi-Fi went down because I haven't heard from you all in the chat in a second. So if I could hear from you, that would be amazing. No tea, no shade. Where was I? Okay, good. You guys are just paying attention. That's good. Because the website was loading slow and then no one talked in either place for a while. So I was like, is my Wi-Fi down? And my boyfriend stopped yelling at his video game, so I was like, what's going on? Anyway, the military was not equipped to handle this. Some lawmakers proposed making the Bureau a permanent independent agency or making it part of the Interior Department, but that was met with a lot of opposition. And then, like we talked about, Congress and the president were really beefing with each other. So Bureau offices were poorly staffed and under-resourced and unable to cope with the numerous needs of all these people who were still facing widespread violence and discrimination alongside trauma and poverty from like having generations of people be enslaved. So the Bureau's commissioner office was responsible for overseeing reparations in the entire former Confederacy with a staff of just 10 clerks. And as of 1868, they had only 900 officials to serve millions of people across the South. 900 officials is not enough to effectively serve 4 million people who have just been freed from slavery, which like we all know is going to affect them in so many ways. Let me divide 4 million by 900. That's over 4,000 people per official. 4,000 people that you're supposed to make sure have food, education, can contact their family, and a job. Come on. That was never going to work. Like, that was never, ever, ever, ever going to work. And on top of being understaffed, they also became targets for racist violence. Many white people in the South saw the Bureau as a symbol of unjust federal occupation. Because keep in mind what we talked about the beginning. White Southerners, did they deserve the Civil War? A lot of them did, but they're still really traumatized even though they deserved it. So they see this federal office and they're like, you fucking stole my farm and like killed my dad, so fuck you. Like, they hate the federal government. Imagine trying to even serve 100 people without a computer. That's the other thing. You have to write everything by hand. I didn't even think about that. Oh my God. I just want to throw up thinking about how many papers they probably had. White Southerners greatly hindered the Bureau's ability to enforce federal law by denying its authority. When two freedwomen brought a case against a white man named Maynard Dyson in Virginia, he ignored the freedmen's court summons and refused to comply with the court order that he compensate the women. Dyson's attitude was common, and the strained resources rendered the Bureau largely powerless to force compliance. So even though the Bureau existed, like, they really had no chance to do their job effectively. Why was this ever put in the military? Because the government was a fucking mess. They didn't know what to do, and they had so much partisan division. Like, I think that's the hard thing, is it's like, hindsight, I don't want to say that like they were trying their best, because I don't think they were, but they were never in this situation before, so, you know, it's just like shitty. Like, no one knew what to do. Kind of the same way with Trump right now. Like, no legal person knows what to do. It's like very unprecedented. That's the word I was looking for. So in many instances, white Southerners' disregard for the Bureau escalated to violence against schools, teachers, and Black children. In 1869, a white mob burned down the Freedmen's School in Clinton, Tennessee. A teacher later explained to the Bureau that days before the fire, the school had raised the American flag to celebrate the recent presidential inauguration of former Union General Ulysses S. Grant. So that's why the white mob in Tennessee burned it down, because they fucking hated the U.S. flag and the president. That's what happens when you pardon 13,000 treasonous people. That is what happens when you pardon 13,000 treasonous people. Like, that's like, what the fuck did you think they were going to do? Change? Bureau records document many attacks on schools, including Travis County, Texas, 8 in Queen Anne's County, Maryland, 9 in Rockbridge County, Virginia, and 10 somewhere. Okay, I think that got cut off. In 1868, the white owner of a Clarksville, Tennessee building that had freed people wanted to use for a school declared he would rather burn it down to the ground than rent it for a racial slur school. So this just kind of goes to show, like, the education situation for these people that have just been freed from slavery. It is definitely less than ideal. While the Bureau emerged as a key federal institution, like we said, they had only 900 agents, and Congress abruptly abandoned the program in 1872 and refused to renew the program. So they didn't have enough money, staff, and then they got shut down. So it's impossible to expect them to have really gotten the job done. Literally so grateful I wasn't alive during this time. It's rough out here. So, in the face of waning political will to protect Black people's lives and rights and growing political pressure from the South, Congress dismantled the Freedmen's Bureau in 1872. Today, the Bureau records supply some of the most detailed descriptions of the Reconstruction era while also documenting the agency's own shortcomings and failures. The passing of a great human institution before its work is done leaves a legacy of striving for other men, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in 1901. While the Freedmen's Bureau launched as a federal effort to provide support and protection, they struggled to exercise these new freedoms, the inadequate commitment. We kind of already talked about this. So that whole passage is from the Equal Justice Initiative, and how this still remains a very unfulfilled task, why it was and how it was cut early. So this is another thing that's really crazy. A lot of people started talking about this when Juneteenth became a holiday, but many enslaved people did not know that they were free for months and sometimes years. And this is literally from Reddit, so sorry about that, but I really liked the way they explained this. So Union troops Union troops liberating slaves under the Emancipation Proclamation did a lot to convince Southern owners to follow the law whether they wanted to or not. They were known to read the Emancipation Proclamation from county courthouses so everyone knew what was going on. But in very, very rural areas, that never happened. Or in areas where battles were not fought, that never happened. So the last place to be read was Texas, the most isolated area. The 13th Amendment went into effect in 1865, but there were potentially slaves in a lot of different states. The largest group would have been in Kentucky, and they were the last slaves to be freed, allegedly. And a lot of this we don't know. Like, a lot of this we'll never know because a lot of this stuff never got written down. So since there were no longer fugitive slave hunters or laws to return slaves to go back to their master, or police forces were no longer doing this, they would just be able to walk away. And Reddit mentioned the last of this was in Texas. That is Juneteenth. Juneteenth is when Union troops freed African American slaves in Galveston Bay, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And I tried to find, I think I did include it. So this is where it is. Yes, there was still a plantation that was enslaving people in the 1960s. So there's cases of future generations not knowing for years. So like I said, allegedly those were the last ones. In really rural, isolated areas, it went on for much, much longer. This is an article from Vice. We're not going to read the entire thing because it's super long and awesome and really detailed. So I'll just put it in the chat if anyone wants to read it later. This is the summary of the article because the article has tons of interviews that are very long. I might do a stream just about this article. So historian and genealogist Antoinette Harrell has uncovered cases of African Americans still living as slaves 100 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. The 57-year-old Louisiana native has dedicated 20 years to this research. Through her work, she had unearthed painful stories of southern states like Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Florida. Over a series of interviews, she told Justin Fornell about how she became an expert of modern slavery in the United States. So in some very isolated areas, these people just never knew because, like, if you're born as a slave, you don't know how to read and write, you've never left the plantation, you are at least 50, 100 miles away from anyone else, when would you know? And it's not like the master's going to run outside and tell you. So some of these families were literally getting held for generations and generations. So I do want to talk about some of the political successes during this time. I should have put this when I talked about the voting rights. So after the passage of the 15th Amendment, African Americans could vote, so some southern states elected African American men to Congress as both representatives and senators, so Senate and House of Representatives, because, like I said, a lot of areas were predominantly black, so this makes a ton of sense when they were allowing people to vote. There's a Haitian proverb that goes, If work for good for you, the rich would leave none for the poor. That is, I like that. Interesting. Vice also has video interviews with people interviewed. Yes, we might have to do a whole separate stream about that because I wanted to mention it, but like that article was just so good that I was like, I know I can't do it justice within this stream, so I'll just like read their summary. Maybe we will do a whole nother one about that. So Hiram Revels was from Mississippi. He won the election to the Senate. He was the first African-American senator. To add insult to injury, he occupied Jefferson Davis's former seat. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. So it really kind of ate that like the first black man to get elected to the Senate took over Jefferson Davis's seat. It's like, it's a very slay moment. Then we have Joseph Rainey. He was the first African-American in the House. He was a Republican from South Carolina. In the Civil War, he had been a barber and a Confederate blockade runner. So these are actual pictures of them. A total of 16 African-American men served in Congress during Reconstruction, but they each only served 1 or 2 terms. Significantly, 9 of them had been formerly enslaved people. I think like that's exactly who should be in Congress right now. That is exactly. So I recently had to vote in a local election for a bunch of judges in my area, and I decided which judges, because judge is nonpartisan, so I decided which judge to vote on based on who had the hardest life. Because if you have seen some shit, I want you in the government. So like the judge I voted for, she is like grew up far away. I don't remember where she grew up, but her mom got shot in like there was a gang violence and her mom was a bystander and got shot, and then she was in foster care, and then she moved because her aunt adopted her, and then like she dropped out of college because she got pregnant, and then she went back to college and became a lawyer. And I was like, yeah, I want you. Like, you've seen some shit. You should be in charge. That's always how I pick who I vote for. So, and not only did black men get elected into our federal government in Congress, more than 1,500 black men were elected to local and state government positions during Reconstruction. So there was like this kind of short window of like black voting thriving right after Reconstruction when the military was there and like actually enforcing things. A lot of African American men were getting elected to public office. I think that if we had like kind of kept on that train, the world would look a lot better today. Notably, after 1897, we'll talk about the end of Reconstruction, the South did not elect another black representative for 76 years. The next black representative from the South was Barbara Jordan in 1973, and it would be 138 years before we had another black senator, and the first black senator since this time was Tim Scott of South Carolina in 2013. So, let's talk about Southern defiance, because they were defiant. One thing about the South is they're defying everything. So at the start of Reconstruction, Southern legislators started passing black codes. Black codes were laws that basically kept free people in positions of servitude. Black codes are basically slavery by another name, because under slavery, there's not really like laws. Like the master's in charge, and that's the whole situation. Black codes is like, we're going to write down a bunch of really specific ways that we're in charge. And this is why that 13th Amendment is so important, because the 13th Amendment says slavery is prohibited except for punishment of a crime. Black codes, if you break the law, that's a crime. So let's talk about these laws. They varied from state to state. So even county to county, town to town. They looked different everywhere. And they typically authorized local officials to apprehend unemployed African Americans. So it was illegal to not have a job. They would fine them from vagrancy and then hire them out to private employers to satisfy the fines. So if you were literally just like walking on the street, they'd be like, do you have a job? No. You're getting a fine for vagrancy. You owe us $500. So you're going to go work on my friend Bill's farm, and once you earn $500, I'll take it, and then you can go. Except they never let them leave. So some also forbid Black Americans from owning or leasing farms or taking any other job other than a farm worker or a domestic servant. And if you notice, there's lots of literal children, because like I mentioned, there's a lot of orphans and a lot of people literally just arrested children. It's basically a slavery loophole. So this is some examples of black codes. We're not going to read all of them, but just to give you an idea of what this is like. Go away. There we go. So these are from Mississippi. So all freedmen, blah, 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 with no lawful employment or business are found unlawfully assembling themselves together, either in the day or night, shall be deemed vagrants. On conviction, thereof should be fined. You see it. All contracts for labor made with freemen are longer than a period of 1 month shall be in writing. If the laborer shall quit without good cause, he shall forfeit his wages. It shall not be lawful for any freedman to intermarry with a white person. They'll be deemed guilty. If any freedman is convicted of misdemeanors, you can see they're just like all really bad. They're required to be, this is the part that's crazy to me. Hate that word, is required to be in the regular service of some white person or former owner who shall be held responsible for the conduct. And these are all passed after the Civil War. So if you're breaking this law, you get put in prison, and in prison, you're being punished for a crime, so they can use you as a slave in prison. There shall be permitted to keep or rent they should not be permitted to keep or rent a house within the parish community. So like it's illegal to be walking around outside. It's illegal to own a house. It's illegal to be unemployed. It's illegal to quit. Like literally everything is illegal. No public meetings. They have to be held during the daytime with special permission of the captain of the police, within whose beat meeting shall take place. So if you want to have a meeting with other black people, it has to be during the day with police permission in front of him. Have a feeling he's not really handing out those permission slips. They're not allowed to preach to a congregation unless they have writing from the president of the police. They're not allowed to be a representative. Any white female should not be allowed to marry. They're really into the marrying. I feel like a big concern from them. You get the point. Basically, there are laws restricting the freedom and movement of any person so that they can be put in prison. So, black codes lead to I told y'all, the human impact is kind of fucking insane and crazy depressing. That's why I put it last, because I wanted you to understand how all of this happened legally. You get what I'm saying? Like, that's where I want you to understand. So, while many believed the 13th Amendment ended slavery, there is an exemption that was used to create a prison convict leasing system to fill the labor supply shortage. Labor supply shortage seems like a really roundabout way of saying you're not allowed to do slavery anymore. Black codes regulated the lives of African Americans, and justice-involved individuals were often convicted of petty crimes like walking on grass, vagrancy, and stealing food. Arrests were often made by professional crime hunters who were paid for each criminal arrest. So everyone that used to be a professional slave hunter has now been promoted to criminal hunter. That's why, like, the South did not change. They just relabeled everything. And prison convict leasing still exists. Where was I? Even those who were declared innocent in courts would often be placed in this system because they could not pay their court fines. So even if you were found innocent, you still owed money. So companies and individuals paid leasing fees to the state, county, or local government in exchange for a labor of prisoners for farms, mines, lumberyards, bricks, manufacturing, basically literally anything. The convict leasing fees generated substantial amounts of revenues for the southern state, county, and local budgets that lasted through World War II. So convict leasing was going on for a really long time. And this is what I mean when I was at the beginning where I was saying, like, the way we treated the South is why it was so crazy like this, because we did not give the South a path to economic stability. So they used the only system they know, exploitation, to create some form of economic stability. The Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Companies was one of the 12 companies listed in the original Dow Jones Industrial Index and was one of the largest users of prison labor, mostly African Americans convicted of petty crimes. And a number of convicts employed increased after United States Steel, the largest corporation in the world, that is Carnegie Steel, acquired the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company. So like the whole U.S. economy was still being built off of these people's backs, even though slavery was quote unquote over. So many institutions in the late 1800s and early 1900s used convict labor as a way to avoid like unions and strikes and things like that. So if you watched my stuff a long time ago about the labor movement, that also kind of plays a part here, because they were like, oh, if they're in prison, they can't form a union. So that would be easier for us. So convict leasing undermines competitive labor markets and decreases living standards by reducing wage and employment rates among the free population. Because why would you want to pay employees that can quit when you can pay the government a lower amount of money for employees that literally legally cannot leave? So, for example, the prison population in Alabama before the Civil War was 99% white. Almost everyone going to prison was white. And then after the Civil War, the prison population of Alabama was 90% black. So it literally just flipped and increased a lot. Prisons were very small before the Civil War. They really only put like murderers in prison and like people that robbed someone in open air. And then after the Civil War, the prison system really like popped off. So these are some of those convicts working. Some of these photos are as late as 1934. A lot of them are actually. This is in 1941 because cameras also got better. What is this from? Black orphaned children and juvenile offenders. So they didn't care if you were an orphan or a criminal who didn't actually do anything wrong because the laws sucked. Everyone was going to prison. Convict labor. This is an older photo. The outfits. Yikes. Yikes on bikes. No child labor laws yet. Not yet. So that's why a lot of this is going on as well. Another terrible thing is sharecropping. And we're going to go late tonight. I'm sorry, we're going to go so late tonight because there's also kind of a long video I want to show you. So during Reconstruction, a new economic arrangement was born known as sharecropping. This began on the sugar plantations in Louisiana and then quickly spread to the rest of the South. So this is how plantations used to be before the Civil War. There's slave quarters, the slaves work the land, the plantation owner keeps all of the profit, and that's just how slavery worked. Sharecropping is a little bit different. Under sharecropping, the landowner is kind of renting a land to the people that used to be slaves. So most people were sharecroppers for their former master. They didn't usually find somebody else to sharecrop for. Occasionally that happened. When did child labor laws get pushed? Like early 1900s, most child labor laws are state laws, not federal laws. So it varies a lot area to area. So, this whole topic is a giant womp-womp. No, it really is. That's cool. I'm co-working on a mind-numbing work project. So planters broke up, landowners. I don't like planters because that implies they're doing planting, which they're not. Landowners broke up their estates into small units and established either a poor white family or a poor black family. So it was often a mix of both. So the planter provided housing, tools, seeds, supplies, anything else they need. And sometimes tenants borrowed from other people where they basically borrowed things with a really, really high interest rate. So let me actually show you this graphic first. So this is basically the way it works. The sharecropper is the guy in the orange shirt. The landowner, let's call the sharecropper Tom. I don't know. So the landowner is like, Tom, you are going to farm this land. You can keep half of the crop and I'll keep half the crop. Like, this will be great for both of us. Tom is like, okay, cool. But I need food and I need some seeds. And the landowner is like, no worries. I got your back. I'll loan you the money. So Tom is like, great. He's borrowing the money. He's doing his thing. He plants and harvests the crops, whatever. Tom goes to the landowner and is like, hey, landowner, here is all the crops that I harvested. But the landowner is like, Tom, you borrowed $150 from me, but this is only $100 worth of crops. So you owe me $50. And Tom is like, shit, Next year, I'll pay you extra. But then Tom has to borrow money again. So Tom gets stuck in this cycle of poverty. And then because he's in debt, that's a crime and he's not allowed to leave the land, or else he'll just go to prison and get rented back out to the same landowner. So that's kind of how sharecropping works. It's like OG company town, but micro size. It's like a one-person company town. Yes, it's like a payday loan. They do not set prices on the crops. So it's like whatever it sells for at market, that's the money we're working with. So lots of landowners would also lie. They would sell it for like $1,000 and be like, oh, I only made $4. That's crazy. I don't know. So it just depended on market value. So by the 1870s, I think that was where we were. So it was usually cotton, tobacco, or rice. And by the 1870s, sharecropping became the primary means of agricultural organization in the South. And through this system, Black sharecroppers fell further and further and further into debt, which created generational poverty of people being stuck on that land. As late as 1880, Black Southerners owned less than 10% of agricultural land in the South, but they made up more than half of the population. So Black Southerners are the majority of Southerners. Like more than half of Southerners are Black, but they own less than 10% of the land. So think about how that's going to impact generationally. My friend's dad was a sharecropper as a child. Someone I know, their grandma was a sharecropper as a child in South Georgia. So some more details about sharecropping. We kind of already went through this because I explained it in the little graphic. So yeah, I think I'm going to skip over this. Cotton, yeah, this is really just more of the same that we talked about. Oh, this is what I wanted. So between 1880 and 1940, sharecropping played a central role in the economy of the South. Farms run with sharecropping increased dramatically from 24% in 1880 to 37% in 1940. It peaked at 48% in 1930. So this is not just like for a couple years after the Civil War. This is like for generations later. This is a map that shows percentage of sharecropped farms. So this dark red, that is 35 to 80%. So you can see like that strip through the South of the really good land. Lots of sharecropping going on there. This is fascinating to me. So just like you're seeing in this strip in Alabama and Georgia and some of Mississippi, this is crazy. So I saw this on Reddit, so if it's wrong, I'm sorry. But this is how a coastline 100 million years ago influences modern election results in Alabama in 2020. So this is like, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know what the fuck this means. Cretaceous sediments, basically when like Pangea was breaking apart and shit was breaking, something happened right there. I don't fucking know. So there's a really, really fertile soil in this one valley. I don't think it's a valley, but this one kind of area. And then you can see that is where the big farms are. So that's where a lot of slave populations were being held because that's where the big profitable plantations were. So then because of generations of sharecropping, when we're in, 2010, those areas are still predominantly Black. And now those areas are predominantly Democratic. So I think it's so interesting. I love when like science and social studies come together about how that land formation, like we feel that science all the way to today of like race and politics and all of that, which is insane to me. So there's also an insane amount of violence during this time. This is when the KKK was created. These were secret terrorist organizations. There were other ones called the Pale Faces and the Knights of White Camellia. But KKK is kind of the most popular that you guys probably know about. Geology with Miss Redacted. It's crazy how often the North and the South independently developed almost the same things and do the same kind of exploitations with just different aesthetics. A not fun... Oh, I already read that one. Sorry. So, the most notorious of these was the KKK. It originated in Tennessee by 1866, and by 1868, it was basically dedicated to driving Black Americans out of politics and spread rapidly across the South. Klansmen often claimed that they were ghosts of Confederate soldiers and spread rumors that it was unhealthy for Black people to participate in politics. When intimidation failed, they resorted to force and violence as well. They would take Black Southerners out of their houses at night and basically just assault them and even murder them. So when they realized that just like spreading rumors was really not having an effect on people, that's when they really started being aggressively violent towards people and killed tons and tons and tons of people. Lynchings and beatings became, trigger warning obviously, but I don't know if you thought we were going to talk about Reconstruction and racial violence wasn't going to come up, but it came up almost immediately. Don't tell me that's why they wore white sheets. It was also to cover their faces because a lot of them were governors, mayors, cops, business owners, so they covered their faces when they were committing crimes. Lynchings and beatings became daily occurrences, especially if there was an election going on, and it has been estimated that there were 400 hangings of African Americans between 1868 and 1871. I think it was probably more than 400. This is a video where they explain the early KKK. Because now the KKK also hates immigrants and Catholics and Jewish people. The KKK hates like everybody now, but back then they were very dedicated to making sure Black people did not participate in politics. That was their main shtick. 400 recorded, exactly.
In the period following the Civil War known as Reconstruction, the United States Congress enacted a series of laws that gave Blacks the rights of citizenship, voting, and equal protection under the law. But when Blacks tried to claim those rights, Southern whites tried to deny them. In the late 1860s, white supremacist groups began to organize throughout the South. The largest was the Ku Klux Klan.
The origins of the KKK are a little bit obscure. It seems to have begun in Tennessee. It certainly began among former Confederate soldiers.
Why does it keep not working?
Initially, it seemed to be given over to pranksterism. But very quickly, the KKK becomes a rubric to describe all sorts of paramilitary and vigilante groups, some small, some large, some politically connected, some relatively ad hoc, that take it as their task to enforce the submission of the now free Black
Domestic
population
terrorism.
through violent
Yep.
means.
Pretty much.
The Klan's presence was especially strong in Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, and South Carolina, where Blacks equaled or outnumbered the white population. The Klan was made up of former Confederate soldiers.
Where they're saying pranksterism, I know it seems like they're trying to downplay it, but when it started, like the slide said, they were pretending to be ghosts and would be like, if you vote, the ghosts are gonna come back. And they were doing that for probably like 2 weeks. And then they were like, oh, let's kill them. That'll work. So like it got really intense really fast.
Some members of the Democratic Party and those resistant to Congress's plans to reconstruct the South. They were angry that the Republican Party, who held the majority in Congress and were the ones pushing for civil rights for Blacks, were forcing these changes by controlling Southern state governments against the will of white residents.
Boys will be boys. It's just a prank,
Klan
bro.
members terrorized Blacks in church, at the polls, and in schools. They intimidated teachers, forcing them to stop teaching Black students. They used threats of violence to keep Blacks from leaving plantations. And then the threats became real. They beat, tortured, and even murdered Blacks to prevent them from voting and from serving as political leaders. Between 1865 and 1877, the Klan and other related white supremacist groups were responsible for more than 4,000 deaths throughout the South.
You might say
That number
it's
sounds more
the
accurate.
first period of homegrown American terrorism. The Ku Klux Klan was the Al-Qaeda of the 19th
I don't know
century.
why it keeps like
These acts of terrorism
working.
were effective. Many Blacks stayed home from the polls out of fear. As Blacks overwhelmingly voted for Republicans, Republican-controlled state governments in the South began to weaken.
And this was the beginning of a process that eventually leads to a much more massive white mobilization of vigilante violence, which toppled Reconstruction governments through violent means in the middle of the 1870s.
In response to the murders and intimidation, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the Ku Klux Klan
I'll never
Act of
take my right to vote for
1871,
granted. Exactly.
a law that directed the federal government to prosecute people who attempted to deny Blacks their civil rights. Still, the Klan and other groups continued to grow over the next century.
So, like we said, Congress kind of attempted to take over that. But like we said, they didn't have the manpower in the South to really enforce any of these things. They did, for a brief time, use federal troops to protect civil rights in 9 different counties. But the intimidation of black voters still just really, really continued. Did the police do anything? Babe, I have terrible news about the police. We are already over 2 hours, so I'm going to read through this a little bit quickly. But modern day policing can be traced back to slave patrol. Slave patrol was created in the Carolinas in the early 1700s. Literally exactly what it sounds like, slave patrol. This continued until the Civil War, and then the slave patrol was renamed into police, and police were enforcing the black codes like we talked about. So the police, they're enforcing a ton of racist laws in the South. B, a lot of the police are in the KKK. So if we think the police in the South in the 1870s is going to stop the KKK, have you ever seen them in the same room? Because that's really not going to happen. Yeah, so that's a really interesting thing about police. It all goes back to the pardons. Yeah, so by the 1900s, local municipalities started creating police to enforce Jim Crow laws and all of that stuff. So in a lot of northern towns, police did not start as slave patrol. Police started as voluntary night watch. But in the South, the police started as slave patrol. So I think that's a really important piece of context. This is a short video to show the lynchings and racial violence during Reconstruction from 1865 to 1876. It's literally, I don't even think there's any audio on it. It's just a map to show. And like someone said, the 400 was ones that got reported. I think these numbers, this is from the Equal Justice Initiative. They looked through a lot of like family records and got more information than they had back then, I think. KKK members also involved like the whole college fraternities, aka the Divine Nine, had to be created. Yeah, exactly. So you can see the lynchings are extremely, extremely high numbers, and it's literally just continuously going up. Thousands of more black people were lynched whose deaths cannot be documented. EJI has now verified 6,500 lynching. Thousands more have yet to be documented, like we mentioned. So moving on to Reconstruction ending and waning Northern resolve. By the 1870s, Northern passion was kind of like over. They were like, okay, the war ended, like 6 years ago now? Like, let's wrap it up. And Northerners had other things they cared about. They cared about industrialization. A lot of them cared about child labor. A lot of them cared about getting exploited by their employers. Like, they had other issues, and keep in mind, Northerners are not there seeing it. A lot of them have no idea how violent the South is. So once the 15th Amendment passed, a lot of white Northerners were like, it kind of seems like we're done. I think we've done enough. So they kind of stopped caring, which is terrible. And by 1872, pretty much all Southern white people had regained suffrage, so they are continuing to push out black office holders through violence at the polls and through just like political measures, gerrymandering, things like that. And by 1876, every Southern state was Democratic again. So like those black congressmen that I showed you, that was for a brief time. By this time, the KKK is running rampant. The Freedmen's Bureau is done. And the South is really returning to the way that it was. I live in Tulsa, and there's markers where lynchings took place. It's important to know how it happened. I'm sure so many more occurred. So these redeemer governments were led by rich former slave owners who are now convict leasers, and they dominated Southern politics really still. And it was under these governments that Jim Crow laws got passed. So segregation, like you guys probably learned in school, the civil rights movement, the 2 water fountains, all of that got passed during this time after the white Southern slave owners overtook the governments again. And Democrats won control of the House of Representatives in 1874. So not only are they overtaking the South, they're overtaking a lot of the country. And then Reconstruction officially ends a little bit later. The final act was the Civil Rights of 1875, which was supposed to discriminate against prohibit racial discrimination in public accommodations, transportation, and jury selection, but the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional. So it's really not going well at this point. Like, we had a brief time where we made a lot of progress and things were kind of starting to go good, and then it just really became a mess. And then in the election of 1876, it was a disputed election. It was Rutherford B. Hayes against Samuel Tilden. When the votes were counted, both parties claimed they had won the election because there were some votes that were getting disputed. I don't really know the details about like why they were disputed, but there was a dispute, basically. And Democrats threatened to filibuster. Democrats are like, we're not going to let you. Yeah, very much 2020 vibes. Very much 2020 vibes. The Democrats were basically threatening to like hold the government hostage. So they created the Compromise of 1877 because, again, Democrats were pro-slavery, Republicans were anti-slavery. So the Democrats were like, we'll allow the Republican president if he promises to take the troops out of the South. So the Democrats elected Hayes. They just kind of like gave up on the election. And Hayes, his first act in office was really starting to get the troops out of the South, which brought an end to military Reconstruction. So Reconstruction literally ended, not because we did it, not because something happened, but because there was a disputed election and it got done in a backdoor deal. Like just how today things happen in Congress that we're like, how the fuck did that happen? Like someone had a backdoor conversation. They literally just sold out the entire South to win the election. They were like, I guess we'll just be done with that at this point. Was it common for contractors and vendors? I don't know. Anyway, me seeing that one of the most critical points of U.S. history was solved and ended by a backdoor deal to win an election, literally. So now that the troops are moving from the South, things got a lot worse. Sharecropping and prison labor really continued and grew a lot. Voter suppression was passed very intensely during this time. One of those forms of voter suppression is the grandfather clause. So the grandfather clause, I'm not going to read it, I'm just going to explain it. The grandfather clause basically says, if your grandpa could vote, you're good. You can vote. But if your grandpa did not vote, you have to take a literacy test. So let's say I'm a poor white guy named Bill. I'm illiterate. I cannot fucking read. I couldn't even write my own name on a paper. I can go there and be like, my grandpa voted. And they're like, come right in, Bill. Exercise your right to vote. But if you are black in 1867, your grandpa did not vote. So they're like, oh, you have to take a literacy test. So like this kind of directly violates the 15th Amendment, but nothing is being enforced, and it would like come down to the court system and no one's enforcing it. I'm feeling a little too educated right now. How do kids learn so much every day? So just for context, everything we learned tonight, it would take me 4 days to teach my students this. They would learn this over the course of 4 days. So former slaves had not been granted the right to vote. So this meant that black people were prevented from voting, but poor white people could still vote. They were used most often against people of color, but sometimes against white people. So here's an example of a literacy test. Like I said, we're just going to be here for like 9 years tonight, I guess. This is a literacy test. It's literally hard as fuck. And I want to note on here, be careful, as one wrong answer denotes failure. You have 10 minutes to complete the test. Draw a line around and this is from Louisiana. Draw a line around the number or letter of this sentence. Draw a line under the last word in this line. White people whose grandfather couldn't vote, the voter people just wouldn't ask further questions, yeah? It was also like, a lot of times they weren't asking. Like if you were white, they were like, you can come in. And if you were black, they would be like, who was your grandfather? Let's get that squared away. So like, not only was the law written to target black people, the law was only being applied to black people as well. They didn't even really make most white people adhere to the law. Except in some areas, they really hated poor white people, so they would. And again, all of these voter oppression things, these are local laws and state laws, so they're going to look different in every state. We're looking at Louisiana as an example, but the nuance and the details might shake out differently, even county to county. Circle the first letter of the alphabet in this line. Above the letter X, make a small cross. In the first circle below, write the last letter of the first word beginning with L. Cross out the number necessary when making the number below 1 million. In the line, cross out each number that is more than 20 but less than 30. And keep in mind, you have 10 minutes. This is 4 pages. This is literally so long. In the third square below, write the second letter of the fourth word. Write down on the line provided what you read in the triangle below. Divide a vertical line in 2 parts by bisecting it with a curved horizontal line that is only straight at its spot of the bisection of the vertical. This literally isn't even a literacy test. It's so confusing. And if you get one wrong answer, you fail. So that's how they prevented all these people from voting for so long. It would take me 10 minutes to read all the questions. It's made to be impossible. I feel like that meme with the old blonde math lady. Okay, this is what I was saying we might not have time for, but I'm going to add it anyway, and we don't have time, but we're going to watch it anyway. This is a really good video. This is about when white supremacists overthrew a government. So that is kind of the end of Reconstruction. So I wanted to just show you, like, what happened once the troops were removed, because we kind of stopped with the troops getting removed. What happened after that?
For a long time,
I'm going to put this on faster, just to let you know.
If you went to the library in Wilmington, North Carolina, there was one thing you weren't allowed to research.
We were refused. We were rejected by the librarian.
When I asked about or inquired about 1898, they wanted to know why.
I was told that, yes, they had something, but they
So this happened in 1898, what they're talking about, and the troops were removed in, I think it was 1877. So while later, but just to give you the vibes of post-Reconstruction in the South.
It was under lock and key.
The story of Wilmington in 1898 still isn't widely known.
What happened here and what's now just this empty patch of grass would radically change racial politics in North Carolina.
This is the story of an American election, but also of something we don't usually find in American history: the violent overthrow of a democratically elected government. In the late 1800s, Wilmington, North Carolina was the state's largest city. It had a majority black population, and historians today describe it as a rarity in the post-Civil War American South.
Wilmington, prior to November 1898, was what the New South could be at the cusp of the 20th century.
There was an unusual degree of black prosperity.
In Wilmington, there were successful black entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, but also black elected officials. And for a time, that was true throughout the state. Take a look at the politicians on this poster of the 1889 North Carolina House of Representatives. Here at the bottom are black Republican representatives, some from Wilmington. North Carolina also sent 4 black Republicans to the U.S. Congress between 1875 and 1899. The Democratic and Republican parties of 1898 in many ways occupied opposite parts of the political spectrum than they do today.
Most African Americans were voting for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party was white voters almost exclusively. White supremacy was the central focus of the platform for the Democratic Party.
Republicans in North Carolina were successful in part because of a third party called the Populist Party, made up of mostly white farmers fed up with the tough economic times. North Carolina populists joined up with Republicans to form what they called the Fusion Party. And in the elections of 1894 and 1896, the Fusion Party defeated the Democrats in sweeping victories statewide. That meant North Carolina now had a government that shared power between black and white politicians, including a newly elected Republican governor. Together, they moved towards reforms that would favor black Americans and working class whites.
This was something that the Democratic Party folks were simply not going to accept.
A multiracial government wasn't just a disappointment for Democrats. It was more like a humiliation. They needed a plan to take back control of the state in the next election. So party leaders like Furnifold Simmons, future U.S. Senator, Charles Aycock, future North Carolina governor, and this man, Alfred Moore Waddell, came up with one: to beat the Fusion Party by luring white populist voters away from their alliance with black voters. Wilmington, with a large black population and a local fusion government in power, would be a focus of their campaign. The State Democratic Party handbook for 1898 laid out their goal: consolidate the white vote by stoking white anger and resentment. It said, "This is a white man's country, and white men must control and govern it."
Yikes.
Their most effective tool was the media. One of North Carolina's biggest newspapers was a Democratic Party mouthpiece. It ran racist political cartoons throughout 1898.
Not everybody was literate in 1898, but to see a political cartoon of the type that ran, you may not be able to read it, but you know exactly what it means.
Many of the cartoons were centered on the threat of Negro rule, even though the fusion government was mostly white. They also played up another fear.
Black men threatening white women became a theme. White men need to do all that they can to protect white womanhood.
This was all part of North Carolina Democratic strategy, but it echoed the national racist rhetoric of the time. In one speech that Democrats printed in Wilmington paper, a prominent Georgia writer named Rebecca Felton said,
"If it takes lynching a black man a day to protect white womanhood, I say lynch."
Her speech prompted
the way that people wrote this down. Like, are you not embarrassed?
A Wilmington
are you not
man
embarrassed?
Named Alex Manley, owner of the Black Run Daily Record newspaper, to respond with a column. He made a simple observation that at the time was shocking.
That white women who had liaisons with black men did so voluntarily and enthusiastically.
Manley.
So literally what popped off, they're about to get into some crazy racial violence that occurred. The spark that made the fire start is this black man writing that sometimes white women engage with black men voluntarily and enthusiastically, and that made shit hit the fan in Wilmington, North Carolina.
He wrote, "Every Negro lynched is called a big burly black brute, when in fact many were sufficiently attractive for white girls to fall in love with them."
Manley pretty much said, in a nutshell, sometimes white women choose to be with black men.
Manley's editorial became another tool for Democrats. Newspapers reprinted it, called it a horrid slander, and ran comments about it on a daily basis. It was just a few months before the election, and white voters were angry.
By the time the election rolls around on November 8th, black voters, Republican voters, had been thoroughly intimidated here.
By all accounts, the elections of 1898 were a sham. The Democratic Party had a paramilitary group called the Red Shirts. They attacked and blocked black residents from voting. At a rally just before the election, Alfred Moore Waddell provoked the crowds. He said, "Negro office holding ought at once and forever be brought to an end, even if we have to choke the current of the Cape Fear River with carcasses." The votes were counted, and the Democrats won.
Democratic candidates won every seat they had a candidate up for election in.
But some local fusionist politicians remained in power because their seats hadn't been up for re-election, like the white Republican mayor and the Board of Aldermen. And of course, the election did nothing to undo the economic power black folks held in the city. The Democrats had won the election, but their goal of total white supremacist control remained out of reach.
And so they engineered what was essentially a coup d'etat.
The day after the election, at a gathering for white men in Wilmington, the Democrats unveiled a document called the White Declaration of Independence. It contained...
This is crazy to me. That's why, even though we literally didn't have time, I'm just showing this to you anyway. We've been here for like 2.5 hours. Because this is insane that this is like not a part of curriculums. And what happened in Wilmington, North Carolina is like unique, but it's really not. A lot of small white towns pushed out their black lawmakers.
An ultimatum. Cynthia Brown, whose descendants were in Wilmington back in 1898, is a historian at her church where there's a preserved copy of the Declaration from the next day's newspaper.
"We will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin."
They would strip black men of voting rights. They would give white men a large part of the employment heretofore given to black men. And as for Alex Manley, we demand that he leave the city forever within 24 hours.
So Alex Manley was the guy that wrote, like, sometimes white women engage with black men enthusiastically and voluntarily, so they're kicking him out, basically.
Hundreds of white men marched to the offices of the Daily Record. Manley was gone. He had fled to save his own life. They set the Daily Record building on fire.
Yikes.
This is where it once stood.
Once the white leadership destroyed Alex Manley's printing press, they destroyed one way in which the African American community in Wilmington could organize itself and keep itself informed.
At City Hall, the mayor and Board of Aldermen were forced out.
There's 200 armed men in City Hall at the time. They didn't do it of their own free will. And as they resigned, a new member selected by the Democratic Party was voted into office.
So those politicians that their seats were not up for re-election, this white mob came in and forced them to resign and then put in Democrats into those seats.
Waddell, who once threatened to fill the Cape Fear River with black Audis, was the new mayor of Wilmington. Meanwhile, the mob had grown to about 2,000 men, and the violence spilled into the streets. In these photos, X's mark where the first black residents were killed.
The stories are that they were dumped into the river, and there are varying stories about how many people were killed.
I see 40 to 60 clearly as fatalities as a result of the violence, but I think it was higher.
Many black residents hid for days in the swamps and the wooded cemeteries in the city, including Cynthia's great-grandmother.
To just be hiding in a swamp in a cemetery, yes, I can put this link in the chat.
And thousands of other residents fled Wilmington, never to return. Shortly afterward, Democrats printed booklets celebrating a glorious victory, and in the newspapers depicted black residents as the instigators.
This image is a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened during 1898. You know, what you see is African-American men with guns, not white men with machine guns.
The city never regained its black majority.
I never learned that there were black elected officials to be pushed out. It's so sad thinking how different the U.S. would be if Andrew Garbage Johnson hadn't sided with terrorists. And there's so many things that should have been different. Like the pardons, the black codes, the sharecropping, the convict leasing. Like all of it should have been different.
Majority population. Jim Crow laws like literacy tests and poll taxes that prevented black people from voting.
Oh, poll taxes I meant to put in here. It's when they charge you a tax to vote. So if you are a poor sharecropper, you can't vote.
Were immediately enacted, and Wilmington's spirit of black opportunity was crushed. Black political representation in the state was over. It would be 90 years until North Carolina elected its next black Congress member.
Wilmington did a really great job of covering up a very dark past for a very long time.
Over the years, the textbooks on North Carolina's history have struggled to accurately describe what happened in 1898. This one from 1933 says the situation was unfortunate for both races. And this one from 1978 doesn't have that much more detail. But they both praise Charles Aycock, a politician who helped perpetrate the riot. They say he had a keen mind and a kind heart.
Perfect.
And that, in fact, he was one of the best friends that the colored people had in the state.
Awesome. That seems very
It's a legacy
accurate.
that North
Like it
Carolina
should
has
be in
yet
a
to fully
textbook.
undo.
What the fuck?
The names of the perpetrators are on Wilmington school buildings and city parks. But the legacy is also bigger than those names. Turn on the news, and the state's long history of political suppression echoes.
And we turn to a strict new voter ID law in North Carolina. Racial gerrymandering
So much
and a push
evil.
for new voting
So,
maps.
so
The court
much
says
evil.
The Republican-led legislature redrew congressional districts along racial lines, violating the Constitution.
There's a tremendous amount of intimidation that is still felt by the black community.
It doesn't have to be mass mayhem and violence in the streets.
The strategy shifts towards designing state laws in such a way that you could exclude blacks from.
Oh, that's good. They changed the park names and that statue is gone now after 2020. Yeah, this video is a little old, I think. It's like 6 or 7 years old.
Voter participation.
The subliminal pursuit of continuing the white Declaration of Independence.
And if you don't see it for what it really is, it can happen all over again.
So yeah, even though we didn't have time, I just love that video. I think that video does like a great job of explaining one specific example that is emblematic of this time period. That was depressing. That was depressing. I applaud y'all for sticking through it. That was depressing. It's super important, but it's depressing. I hope that even though the content was depressing, you still engaged in this and had like a positive learning experience from this. But next week, we will be talking about Sarah Palin. It'll be less depressing. It'll be a lot more lighthearted. We're mainly just going to make fun of Sarah Palin. And let's go ahead and play our freaking game. There are my sources. Some of these were my slides that I've used before that I bought on Teachers Pay Teachers. I can't remember the name of them, but if you want them, email me, and I can tell you where I purchased them. I'm not going to send them to you for free because I want to respect the person that made them. But anyway, there are the rest of the sources that I used. And let's go ahead and play our freaking game. Yes, I did just post the Vox video. There it is again. But if you just look up like Vox Wilmington, I bet you can find it. So depressing, but we loved it. Which one do you guys want to do? Let's do space because I don't like America and I'd rather just be in space. So what this is a game. How do you put these slideshows together? I just do the damn thing. I just do the damn thing is how I do it. I really just copy and paste from the internet. But these slides, the ones that had like the black background, I use those at school and then I just like added in extra stuff for you guys. So this is a game. There is, oh, I meant the article that we read from earlier. Email me. I can send you this whole thing and I'll figure it out. I don't know off the top of my head where that link is, but email me. So this is the game. It's just for fun. It's a little trivia game. It's going to ask you for your name. You do not have to enter it. You can put something fun or funny because it is going to come up on here. I'm going to go ahead and say good night to TikTok. Love you guys so much. Thank you for being here. So to play the game, it's all multiple choice about what we learned tonight. Go to join.nearpod.com and you enter the code DCT5I. And then it'll let you pick a little character and you get to answer these little trivia questions. So I will put the link in the chat again. You can do this on your phone. I don't want your email address. You don't have to make an account. If you just want to look at my screen, that's fine. You don't have to participate on your phone. But you can do this in a new tab on your computer. You can do it on a phone. You do not need the app. It's going to try and tell you, like, do you want to download the app? You don't have to. You can do it within your browser. But yeah, I'll just give you a second to do your little thing. And I'm going to move kind of quick because I am a little sleepy. It is 9:30. It's my bedtime. My bedtime is actually 10:30, but you know, I want to eat some ice cream, hang out a little bit, watch Broad City maybe. Alrighty, I'll give you a couple more moments to join. I'll put the link in the chat again. And you get to pick your little characters. All my students, if you make the account, it gives you more character options. They try and like motivate you to make an account. And my students will literally scream at each other. Like they'll be like, let's all pick penguins. And someone will pick like the frog and they're like, boo, we hate frogs. And I'm like, stop discriminating against the frogs. And it's not even consistent. Like, they'll pick a different animal and they get so angry when someone doesn't pick the one that the class where they all wanted to be the same one. So funny. And thank you to all my subscribers here, my subscribers on YouTube. I'm trying to be like a better influencer and like and subscribe so I can like make more money and stuff, but it's annoying. I just hate it. Like, that just feels so cringy. But thank you. I do appreciate it, especially my subscribers on Twitch. Like, you're giving me money. That's so nice. I never give anybody money. That's so nice of you. That's literally so fucking nice of you. Thank you for subscribing. Another way to give money, all loud mads, thanks for subscribing. If you scan the QR code that's on my screen right now, I'm partnered with a Palestinian family to raise money to help them get evacuated. His name is Dr. Sofyan. We have done a fucking awesome job, okay? We raised 10 grand in only a couple weeks. We're more than 33% of the way there. I make the Amazon man pay you money. I love that even more, honestly. We are more than 33% of the way there. So thank you to everyone who has already donated. I appreciate that. And there's the info there. Feel free to share, donate, all the things. But I am going to go ahead and start the game. I'm giving you 3, 2, 1. We're started. Yes, let's donate, please. What did we learn about today? Everybody better get this right. Lisa Vanderpump and Gordon Ramsay have a show together? I did not. I should be like on an email list for that. Who took over after Lincoln? Y'all better get this right, because a bunch of the photos are in color. Oh, a Dutch Bros parking lot. Good to see you. I want to try Dutch Bros so bad. It doesn't exist where I live, but I want to try it. It looks good. Another place I've had, but I wish it existed where I lived, Caribou Coffee. So good. Which amendments were passed during this time? Y'all are like really eating up this game. I could tell y'all were very attentive tonight. Who did Congress put in charge of the South? Imagine if it was the French. I feel like it would have gone better. It was the US military. That's who was in charge of the South. Indigenous Americans, as if. So, what did Special Field Order number 15 give black families? Imagine if it was private security. Maybe that would have worked. This is really just a way for me to like test my Reconstruction ideas. It was 40 acres of land and a mule. I didn't know mules were sterile. That's so interesting. What's the difference between carpetbaggers and scallywags? I really like gave y'all the questions I told you to remember. Not Andrew Johnson's butt cheek winning. That's hilarious. Doing donuts at a Walmart parking lot. Stop. What was the name of the organization created to support the people that were freed from slavery? I did get my trampoline, but it is not put together. A guy is coming on Friday to put it together. It's just been sitting in the hallway in the box for a while. The Freedom Fun Fiesta. I was proud of that answer. As an ugly scallywag, I'm offended by that answer choice. Oh, can we see the temp tattoo? Yeah. Hold on. My arm is like hard to show it to you. There you go. It's really like blue-green right now. It'll develop tomorrow and be darker, like navy black. I love it. This is Mucha, the Seasons. If I was to ever get a tattoo, it would be her. But I don't know. It's like too much commitment for me. Why did Reconstruction end? Oh, I hope I put 2 right answers here, because there are 2 right answers. I hope I selected both of them. Sorry if I didn't. Did I do it right? Let's see. Oh, I didn't. It's B and C. Yeah, I wish I could get the Mucha Seasons like 1, 2, 3, 4, but they told me that I can't get them and have them be detailed, so whatever. What are we learning about next week? And also, all of these are future topics, so get excited. Only one of them's the right answer, and it's Sarah Palin. But we are going to do Hobby Lobby, Julia Fox, and Lisa Barlow. Nice job, Jack, doing donuts in a Walmart parking lot. I'm shook. A Dutch Bros parking lot. Ash, Cowboy Girl, Rose, Southern Trauma Response, Michelle, CB, Caitlin, Andrew Johnson's Butt Cheek, Pregnant Abraham, Amber, Ellen, Wally Bag, Meggio, Honest Abe, Nee Collie, Kim, and I will scroll through the rest. Nice job. Nice job. Thank you all so much for being here. We were here for a very, very long time tonight. I appreciate you all being here and living, laughing, and learning with me. This is one of my favorite topics to teach, not because it's good, but just because it's really interesting. And I was not taught this well. So I love teaching it to other people because I think it's so, so, so important. I'll give a couple seconds in case anyone has a respectful meme, but have a great night. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you're feeling informed. I don't know, positive word to say. Forgot to make a meme. Also, not upset we went over normal time. Love this lecture. Thank you. So, as a South Carolinian, this was super interesting. I'm big sad. Yeah, I'm big sad too. But be happy that we know about it because for a long time people didn't know. So be happy that there are people doing this work and learning about this and talking about this because people could have just ignored this and moved on. But like the Vox people, the historians in North Carolina, people are talking about it. So I think that that is a really good thing. That should make us feel a little bit inspired. Have a great night and I will see you next week.